Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Tonight we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed. Get ready for 8 of the most disturbing true Texas horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. Before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing, and they miss the creepiest spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit subscribe now. Tonight is just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Tell me in the comments. Here, the night is only getting started, and the horror's ready to unfold. Now, let's dive into the darkness. I hit Marfa at the tail end of a day spent inside a windshield. The sky out here does not say sunset so much as it remembers how to bleed out. A long band of copper slid low over the scrub and the wind shoved dust down the highway like somebody shaking a rug. I had been on US 90 so long that the mile markers felt like a pulse. Van Horn in the rear view. Valentine already gone, with its fake Prada box. The air went thin and metallic when I rolled the window down, and the smell of creosote and oil and old heat came in as steady as a tide. I have made a living out of standing still and pointing glass at the world. It is not as romantic as the people think. It is sore shoulders and being at the right place when nothing happens. But the Marfa lights had been on my list for years and I had finally run out of reasons to say no. My doctor had told me to get more sleep. My ex-wife had told me to get a life. My editor had told me to get something that clicked. I kept hearing a low whine under everything in the city where I lived. A dog whistle hidden under the hum of refrigerators and distant sirens. And it felt like a pressure headache that never broke. I told myself the desert would wring it out. The Mitchell Flat viewing area was a pullout with a fence and a coin-operated viewer that ate quarters like a bored animal. There were 2 sedans already there when I arrived. 3 people in denim jackets leaned against the rail and watched nothing in particular with the patience of people who use not much happening as a way of living. A couple sat on the hood of a dusty rental, their ankles crossed. I nodded and did what I always do when I want to be invisible. I made myself busy. I set up one tripod, then another, then a third. It was something I had started doing when the shakes got worse, because distribution calmed me down. 3 different angles, 3 different lenses, one wide, 150, one telephoto stubborn enough to pull a gnat off a coyote at 200 yards. The wind tugged at my shirt, and the sand needled my cheeks. I leveled the heads and checked my bubble levels and checked the focus by habit. A truck moaned past on 67 and the taste of diesel rolled across us like another slice of heat. You tell yourself you don't go places like this wanting anything, but you do. You pretend you are neutral because that is safer than admitting you are a greedy animal with a hunger in its bones. I wanted to see the lights. I wanted to be the man who finally put a clean angle on them. Ball lightning, swamp gas, headlights refracted by layers of temperature and wind shear, whatever. I wanted to catch them like fish. I felt a small cruelty in that and turned away from it. By full dark the couple had left and one of the denim jackets. That left a man with a gray braid and a woman with a styrofoam cup that squeaked every time she lifted it. The man gave me a look that felt like a shrug and said they usually don't show when you care too much. I said I didn't care at all and he smiled like a man who has told himself the same lie for a long time. When the first light pricked up off the horizon it was so modest I almost missed it. I had been staring at a point where a fence line met a dry wash. Then there it was, like a cigarette ember too far off to belong to a human. It flickered and swung a little in a way that didn't look like a car. It came and went like a deep breath. I turned the wide lens that way and the telephoto a little north. I set the intervalometer to sip at the dark every 2 seconds. The cameras chittered on their mounts. The gravel under my boots made a quiet music. 2 more lights lifted off the black line of the world, and for a second I felt the 3 of them as points on my skin. The way you can feel mosquitoes land before they bite. The first one swelled and split, then split again. I did not have words for the sensation of watching something familiar become 3. It was like watching someone you love smile and seeing a wedge of teeth you had never noticed before. The man with the braid said "There you go" in a voice that tried not to spook anything. The woman let out a sound that would have been laughter if it had gone any further. My cameras kept their small animal sounds. My heart slowed in a way that made my hands heavy. The third light did not stay out there. It felt like it hesitated, then drew a line straight toward us. Not fast, not in a way that made anyone panic. It hopped a little the way light seems to hop when it crosses a heated road, and it stopped at what I knew and did not know to call the edge of the parking area. It hung there, indifferent and present, a softness the color of a porch bulb over a cheap rental in a kind town. There was a sound that came with it, and though I could not name it, my skin did. It was the hum a wasp nest makes inside drywall, the droning of lives you can't see but can feel if you put your palm to the spot where the wall seems warmer. I raised my flash without thinking, and then decided I would be polite and not hit it straight on. I turned and popped a test off to the side to check my settings. The light washed the gravel silver and sent all our shadows back toward the fence. The woman flinched. The man said easy. I turned and popped another toward the horizon and saw nothing but scrub and a thin line of mesquite. Then I swung the flash right at the place where the light ought to have been and hit it dead on. There was no glare, no flare on the lens. The beam hit nothing and bounced off nothing. The lot and the fence and the metal viewer all stepped forward in sharp relief and then stepped back as the flash died. In the small empty between thunder and knowing it's thunder, I saw my shadow. I had seen it a million times at a million jobs. It had my narrow shoulders and the tripod legs standing up like insect limbs. It had another shape inside it that was taller. There is a way the desert becomes a throat. The wind past your ears and the empty around you become the shape of your own listening. My mouth went dry. The taller shape did not move, but my shadow shifted around it as if I had grown sloppy and thick. Then the flash was gone and the normal dark came back like a friend pretending to be casual. The man with the braid said he saw that too, and the woman said I don't like it, and somebody somewhere laughed a little too hard and then coughed. I lowered the flash like a gun and realized that I was shaking in a place I did not admit to. The third light was still on the edge of the lot. It hummed. The two out on the flat wobbled and rose and fell. I told myself 100 things in the space of one breath. I told myself I was tired enough to dream awake. I told myself headlights from '67 were finding a thermal seam and reflecting off some freaking trick of physics. I told myself the taller thing was parallax, another person's shadow grazing mine. But the man and the woman stood too far away to cross my silhouette like that. The only thing close to me was the pole of the coin viewer, and it was not that tall and it was not that shape. I took a picture the old way, with the 50 and no flash. I clicked and listened, and then checked what I had like a sinner checking the lock on a door. The screen showed me the parking lot as a grainy painting of itself. My 3 tripods looked like they were bracing themselves for a blow. On the edge of the lot there was only a smear where the light should have been. The way you get a bloom when a thing moves faster than you can tell your hand to be still. The woman said she was going home and she went. The man stood with me longer than strangers usually do. He told me how he had come out here when he was 10 on a blanket in the back of his father's pickup and watched a light move like a snake trying to remember what walking was. He said he had come out in high school with a girl who smelled like pear candy and they had made up stories until they got scared of their own voices. He said he had brought his wife out once and she had not seen anything and had told him that was probably for the best. He said he understood why I wanted to take these things home, but that some birds die in cages faster than others. He left me with his styrofoam cup sitting on my bumper like an offering. The wind knocked it off. The hum stuck. I waited the way you wait at a hospital door for a name you hope not to hear. The absolute quiet never arrived. The desert has its own orchestra and you only learn its instruments if you agree to sit on the hard bench and listen. There were crickets and far coyotes and a periodic metal ping from my car cooling. Under it the wasp nest droned, level as a held note. Somewhere around midnight the first 2 lights drifted higher and thinned out until they felt like stars that had gotten lost and come down for water. The third stayed close. It did not come nearer. It did not go away. I sat cross-legged by my middle tripod and tried to make peace with the certainty that I was an animal operating without the right senses and needed to be polite about it. I must have dozed because when my head snapped forward with that almost violent little kick, the desert was rearranged. The hum had changed. It had risen so slowly that I had not noticed and now it occupied a higher register that tickled the edges of my teeth. The cameras had stopped because the interval had ended and I had not reset it. The third light was behind me. It was not past the fence anymore. It might have been 10 feet off my back. I knew that because the heat of it made my neck prickle. I knew it because it changed the way my shadow fell. Even without a flash I could see my shadow. The desert was so pale under starlight that we made ghosts with our bodies. The shadow that had been mine shot away from my feet and then bent sharply at the height where a man ends and taller things continue. There are moments where your brain tries very hard to make a good citizen out of you. It tells you not to embarrass yourself. It tells you not to swing around and throw your flash at a thing like a spear. It tells you to proceed with caution and take readings and give the world the benefit of all your expensive lenses. I rose to my feet very gently and turned less than a quarter so that the light was still just out of the corner of my vision. When you stand near a wasp nest in a wall, you feel the wood buzz under your fingers. That was the sensation across the skin of my shoulders. It was not heat, it wanted to be. It was the memory of heat. I thought of the way porch bulbs attract everything that cannot resist the lie that burning will not always hurt. The desert smelled like dust and dry green things, and for a second like hot plastic. I lifted the camera without flash and took a picture of nothing. And then without thinking I pivoted and fired the flash straight into the hum. It rinsed the world white. It showed me my car like a thing caught committing a small crime. It showed me the fence like a set of ribs. It showed me the coin viewer like a tall coin-operated cyclops that had decided to be kind tonight. It showed me my shadow, and mine had an outline inside it that had better posture and shoulders like a clothesline and a head that cut the stars in a curve that felt wrong. The flash died and something moved where my name began. In a place with that much sky, you get used to the way your smallness is a comfort and not a threat. The feeling that my feet were holding me in place turned bad. The hum rose again, and this time it had the suggestion of a voice under it, not a human voice, nothing with syllables. I do not mean words, I mean that ragged tone you hear when a beehive gets angry. I lifted the tripod as if it were a staff. The cameras were ridiculous in my hands, little mouths gaping open. I said, "I am leaving now," and my voice did something I wish it had not. It turned low and agreeable, like I was negotiating an exit from a party where I had overstayed. My breath had that hot taste it gets when you run on a treadmill much too long and lie about your age to the machine. I kept my eyes on the ground. There were small scuffs in the gravel where the cups had been, and a drag mark from my boot, and 3 neat circles around each of my tripod legs that had not been there the last time I had looked, as if something had leaned down and turned the screws tighter. I folded one tripod and then another. The third would not loosen. The knob spun, but the leg did not retract. I told myself the grit had jammed it and raised the whole thing in my hands, and it felt heavier than an aluminum thing should. The hum pressed against my back like a field of tiny insects all holding their breath. I do not remember getting the last of my cases into the trunk, only that the world tunneled and my hands operated like a man working underwater. I do remember the way the hum faded when I shut the trunk. It stepped back and looked at me through a window that was not there. I slid behind the wheel, and the interior smell, all old coffee and dust and my own skin, made me feel like somebody's kid hiding in a closet. The engine turned over, stubborn and then generous. The headlights washed the fence, the viewers, the gravel. Nothing stood there. I backed out, and like a man who has built a life on keeping his eye clear, I refused to look in the rearview until I was pointed at 90 again. The road into town was empty. Marfa was a low bruise of lights. I watched the speedometer like a nurse watching a monitor, and did not exceed the limit by anything a judge would care to hear about. The hum came with me until the road curved. Then it was gone, as if something in the geometry of the desert had snapped shut again. I felt sweat chill under my shirt and a fatigue so complete that I wondered if I had slept out there after all and dreamed the whole ugly thing. I took a room at a place that would have looked artfully tired if it were not actually tired. The clerk did not look up when I signed. The key was heavier than it needed to be. The room smelled like bleach and old conditioner. I sat on the end of the bed with my cameras on my knees, and I did what I always do when I am about to prove to myself that I am a very reasonable man. I plugged cards into my laptop and watched thumbnails appear in neat rows like a child lining up toy soldiers. At first it was a relief. The wide-angle frames showed the flat as a sheet of satin. Little blooms. The middle lens caught one of the lights swinging in a way that made it look like a lantern in an unseen hand. The telephoto made the distant lights look like planets pretending. I saw the moment the third light drew closer and climbed over the fence by simply not caring about it. The frames around the flash were messy whiteouts. I scrubbed through them back and forth and then stopped at one and stared without wanting to. It was the frame that should have shown me nothing but overexposed gravel and fence and viewer. It showed my shadow on concrete with something taller nested inside it, exactly the way my body had felt, but on the screen the taller shape was not a simple silhouette. It had edges that looked like a man glimpsed behind heat. It had a suggestion of arms that were wrong in their length and a head that did not taper right. If I leaned closer I could almost convince myself that the pixels had decided to arrange themselves into eyes. I checked the metadata. The timestamp was good. The sequence was right. I could make this into a story somebody would share and argue about in comments until morning. I could tell myself it was a motion artifact or compression. I sat back hard enough that the bed creaked and got up without standing and went to the mirror over the sink. It showed me a man who had lost things and pretended he hadn't. It showed me a man who slept in strange places because his own bed made him feel like he had been left. The room made a sound. It was a small sound like paper. It came from the table where I had laid the third tripod leg to work the grit out later. The leg unrolled itself by 3 inches as if someone had warned it that it was time. The knob did not move. The leg moved. The hum that had followed me did not come back in the air. It came up through the metal of the tripod and into the table and from there into my teeth. I reached without thinking and caught the leg like you catch a wrist that is slipping. The metal was too warm. I said no in a voice that belonged to me when I was a boy and the dark had a face. The room's air conditioner ticked and the old refrigerator gave a guilty groan. The leg stopped and then went the other way, inching itself shorter. I held on and it was like wrestling with a polite man who wants you to believe he does not intend violence. The lights in the room dimmed and came back. It was small, the way a bad dream is small until you try to describe it in words and you cannot make the scale right. The hum faded. The leg stopped. My phone on the nightstand lit up all on its own. The lock screen showed the last photo I had taken before I left the flat. I had set it that way a year ago and never changed it. It replaced itself while I watched. It became the last frame from the flash, my shadow with something taller inside it, arranged in the format my phone liked to make my past look pretty. It saved itself. The phone returned to sleep like something satisfied. I did not sleep. At 3 the sound rose again and seemed to come from the parking lot outside. I opened the curtain an inch and saw no one. I saw 3 points of light arranged as if somebody had set lanterns out at the corners of a stand to show men where to put their feet. They glowed the yellow of bugs. They did not move. They sat at the height of my camera lenses on their tripods. I checked the door twice and put a chair under the knob, an old habit from cheap gigs and cities where luck is a lie. Every time I closed my eyes I saw the frame where my shadow bulged. The next time I looked at the laptop the sequence of thumbnails had been reorganized in a way that made no sense. 4 copies of the same frame sat next to each other, the one where the light hung at the edge of the lot, and as I clicked them they were the same and then they were not. In the second copy a smear, in the third a longer smudge, in the fourth the suggestion of a line that reached from the edge of the lot toward where my knees had been. Not a beam. A path. I packed near dawn because daylight makes cowards feel smarter. I told myself I would go back out there and show that I wasn't afraid, and I was lying to myself so hard that my ears rang. I drove east on 90 and the day opened up, the sky with that high cold whiteness you get after a wind has gone through and cleaned every edge. I stopped at a gas station and the attendant told me to watch out for deer and I told him I would, and we both agreed to pretend nothing else existed because we were human and had things to do. At a turnout past Alpine I pulled over and stood with my coffee and my stiff back and tried to decide whether I was going to send the photos to my editor or erase them and call it a personal archive. The hum came with the cup when I lifted it. It had gone thin and small, the sound you get inside a seashell. I looked at the black surface and saw the faintest glow travel around the rim like it was tracing the cup's circumference for practice. It faded. The coffee tasted like pennies. I drove north and the world did not end. My phone stayed a phone. My shadow behaved itself. But every reflective surface I passed, every shop window, every chrome bumper, every polished patch of hood on a truck idling at a light, offered me my outline, and if the angle was right a taller shape nested inside it, only for a second, only when I had already looked and was looking away. At night in the motel 2 towns later, the tripod leg extended itself while I slept and tapped against the floor until I woke with tears in my throat. When I stood, it did not retreat. It waited, the way the lights had waited, and the hum turned kind. If you look at a thing long enough, it looks back. That is not mystical. It is the way of the world and the price of attention. I went to Marfa for a photograph of something that could be light and could be heat and could be lies told by air over earth. I came away with the knowledge that something out there had been practicing the shape of me. It had learned to sit on the lip of my cup. It had learned to hold its breath inside the legs of my tripod. It had learned that it could stand behind me so close that the border between shadow and person was a polite handshake. I could get in my car and put 1,000 miles between myself and the flat. I could make an unconvincing joke about porch bulbs and bugs. I could show you the frame and say it was compression and leave you to your opinions. And then at some truck stop where the bathroom is lit too bright and the mirror is too honest, you would raise your eyes and see your own dark cutout of light, and inside it, only for a blink, a taller thing that had always been there waiting for you to turn on the flash. We called it a test run, because calling it an episode made it feel like we owed someone something besides ourselves. We were 3 kids with thrift store gear and big ideas, each pretending the other 2 weren't a little scared of nighttime in Denton County, of the black water under bridges, and the sound of trees when there's no wind. We met in the parking lot by the trailhead while a sliver of moon got snagged in the branches, and what light there was got eaten by the green tunnel of the park. It was August heat that had soaked itself into the wood and metal all day, and was coming back out now in waves that touched your face like a breath. We had 2 flashlights and a headlamp and a recorder with a dead cat windscreen that wasn't fooling anybody. We had a plan we'd rehearsed in my living room with the air conditioner set too cold. I had written a script that I kept folding and unfolding, getting it softer and smaller, until it finally just tore in half and I put it in my pocket anyway. Our name was Lone Star Shadows. That was Mia's idea because she loved alliteration and the way it sounded like we knew what we were doing. She had a voice that made you listen even when she was telling you something you already knew. She had a pair of boots that her father had bought her in Fort Worth on the Stockyards Strip. Boots that squeaked the first week she wore them. Boots she said were lucky because she had made the freshman girls' volleyball team in them. Devin was the tech, the one who could solder 2 broken things and make a third thing that worked if you didn't look at it too hard. He was skinny and loud and convinced there was a frequency you could play through the spirit box that would make ghosts talk like guests on a morning show. I was the one who wrote and edited. I liked being behind the camera, behind the mic, shaping the sound so you couldn't hear my voice tremble. My name is Cal. The only reason I pushed for Old Alton Bridge was because I could drive and Mom didn't ask questions if I said I was with Devin and Mia, and the Goatman was practically public domain. We did our research like we always did, skimming archives and Reddit threads, reading whispered versions of the same story that passed from one class to the next at Denton High and Geyer and Ryan. Oscar Washburn, a black goat farmer who did things honestly and too well. A sign that said this way to the Goatman, the wrong men taking it personal. The night they came for him and found his wife and children gone. The rope and the drop and the empty noose swinging over Hickory Creek. The story forked after the fall. In one they found him alive and cut off his head and threw it into the creek. In another he vanished under the bridge and became something else. We promised each other we'd say his name respectfully, that we'd not poke a bear we didn't understand, that we'd come to listen. Then it was a group chat full of memes and a GoPro battery that wouldn't hold a charge and a meeting at Whataburger where a manager yelled our number twice because we were laughing too loud. The legend felt like a costume someone kept trying on until it fit. It felt like something borrowed and altered and made meaner. The gravel on Old Alton Road sounded like glass breaking under tires when I turned off I-35 and took the curve slow. The map on my phone glowed and flickered like it wasn't sure it wanted to be part of the plan. The houses fell away. The dark got thicker and the trees on either side started to lean toward each other. The road ended at the gate with the sign. The sign was dented and vandalized and as much a part of the story as the bridge itself. It said Old Alton Bridge with an arrow and below it in black spray paint was the word Goatman in a hand that leaned forward like it was running. The parking lot was mostly empty. A city truck sat nose in and a guy and his dog were coming up as we were going down, the dog's tongue hanging out, eyes reflecting our headlamps like 2 chips of metal. We didn't go quiet all at once. It takes a while for the sounds of laughing and talking to leak out of a group until it's just footfalls and breath, and then even that gets careful. There were cicadas like distant machinery, and the creak made sounds you only heard when you paid attention. Small lappings and burbles and the occasional plunk that could have been a turtle or someone dropping a pebble with intent. I told the recorder where we were and what we intended. Devin held the spirit box like a trophy and Mia walked in front because she said she wanted to feel the first step onto the bridge. She said that like the first step mattered, like it would tell the rest of the steps where to go. When you see old Alton Bridge in the day, it looks like a postcard from when men believed iron could be romantic. The trusses make triangles on triangles and the old wood planks are worn smooth by sneakers and vows and dares. At night the geometry takes on a different logic. It looks like a rib cage. The creak below is just suggestion and smell. There are locks clipped to the railings, rusty hearts and initials left by couples who wanted to trap time in metal. Someone had left a little rope doll that swung when we passed it. It bumped the railing and made a noise that made my teeth ache. We set the recorder on the middle of the bridge where someone had chalked a circle and some letters that had blurred under scuffs. Devin stuck a lapel mic there because he liked having redundancies. Mia put one boot heel up on the rail and looked down and said she could see the reflection of the sky in the water. I said I couldn't see anything. She said look harder and I said I was, and then we stopped bantering because there was a point to it all and we had reached it. She did the intro like we planned and it sounded better than we'd rehearsed. Her voice found the narrative groove and pulled us into it. We announced ourselves and thanked the old bridge for letting us be there. We spoke Oscar's name. We said the county's name and the creek's name. We said we were listening. Devin fired up the spirit box and it rattled through stations, the white noise like hail on aluminum. He said is there anyone here with us and held the thing like he was presenting it to the dark. I watched our breath make nothing in that heat, and I thought of an Instagram post from a girl we went to school with, a photo of herself at the bridge with a caption about checking the vibes. I wondered what we were checking if we would know a vibe when it hit us. Before anything else we heard the first clop. It was clean, a sound you could write down phonetically. A sound with edges. It struck wood like a horse's hoof in an old western. It came from our left where the bridge fell away over the creek. The three of us turned our flashlights that way and lit up nothing. The noise hung in the air after the beam moved through it, and it made me grin because we wanted sounds. We wanted the narrative to line up with reality and this was it. Devin whooped softly and looked at me like did we get that, and I nodded. Mia frowned at the side of the bridge and said probably a deer. Devin said deer don't have hooves that sound like that. Mia said a fat raccoon. I said a branch falling. We laughed because there were three of us, because laughter is a chord you hold when you don't trust the ground. The second clop didn't come from the side. It came straight down onto the planks between us. I felt it in my feet before I understood it in my ears. It was like someone jumped from a low wall and landed with purpose. The recorder ticked in the corner of my vision, and in that small movement of my eye, I saw Mia flinch backward and Devin's mouth open and close on a word that didn't escape. The flashlights tangled. The shadow we made as a group darkened and then split as we moved. There was the smell of hay and something hot and coppery, like pennies left in the sun. The second clop made a new shape out of the air, and that shape did not include us at its center. It was like the bridge had become a room, and someone had entered the room and we had been made guests instead of hosts. The third clop was behind the recorder, and it came close enough to pull a sound out of me that I will never play back for anyone. It was not just the noise, it was the breath that followed, warm and damp, pushing that hay and copper smell into my mouth when I gasped. The breath was wrong because it had weight. Breath is supposed to go away as soon as it is given. This breath lingered. It stuck. Devin raised the spirit box to the spot as if you could press a microphone into a person shaped out of absence. Voices and static rolled through stations, and for a second it sounded like someone said get, but the words stretched and broke on either side. And I wasn't going to pretend it was anything but coincidence. The sense of someone between us was stronger than the sense of anyone inside the white noise. Mia said Oscar in a voice that had lost its radio quality. She said we are sorry for what was done to you and we acknowledge your pain. She said we came to hear you if you wanted to be heard. She said we brought offerings and took her backpack off her shoulders with a shake that made the zipper clatter. She brought out 3 things. A small jar of molasses, because goats didn't care, but she had read that the man had loved the sweet. A cheap little bell on a leather strap because of the livestock, and a printed photo of the old news clipping we found in the library that mentioned a farmer on the wrong side of the white line. The photo with its columns and the words that had aged but not softened. She put them down in the chalk circle like she meant it, and the iron trusses around us seemed to change temperature. We listened. The bridge did what bridges do. It connected 2 points while something moved over and under and through it. The creak made its secrets. It occurred to me that there was a house not far from here, where a porch light was shining and people were watching TV with their shoes off, and that the tennis courts by South Lakes Park had their lights on right now with people moving through moth clouds, and that the highway beyond the trees was still full of cars going somewhere smarter than this. I thought of my mother, the way she said call me when you're coming home, and how I never called on time because I liked the small rebellion of making her worry for 5 minutes. I tried to place the way my heart was pounding into a bucket of causes: fear, excitement, humidity, caffeine, not enough sleep. It did not fit neatly. From the corner of the bridge where the chalk had been scuffed thin, there was the sound of leather buckling under strain. Then a silence so sudden I could hear the blood in my ears. It was not an absence of noise, it was presence. The air that had warmed around us dropped a few degrees. Devon's headlamp made a cone of light that cut through and landed on the handlebars of a rusted bicycle leaning against the rail. There were bracelets wrapped around the top bar, woven and faded, each one a person thinking their wish would hang here and be amplified by iron and creak and legend. There was a little square of wood with a name burned into it and a date. Someone had brought themselves here and left a representation so the bridge could remember. Somewhere a whippoorwill called and then stopped like it had been shushed. I asked the recorder if we could do 1 knock for yes and 2 for no, and Mia shot me a look because you don't make ghosts take tests. Devon shuffled his feet and then made himself still. We were not wearing boots with hard bottoms. We were wearing old Vans and beat-up Nikes. The sound that came then was a 4th clop, softer like the weight had shifted. It was near the middle of the bridge again, and the plank under my left foot shuddered. I squatted and put my palm on the wood. Through the plank I felt something that made me think of a heartbeat under a rib, but it was slower and deeper. It was a thing that measured its world differently. I said, we don't want to disrespect you. And as soon as I said it I felt the disrespect like smoke. We had come with microphones and a name and a story we thought we were telling. The bridge had its own story. The legend had stacked and compacted like layers of geologic time. There was truth inside somewhere, but it had been congealed by repetition and performance, and the way kids dared each other to cross at midnight. We had come at near midnight because we wanted the best story. The recorder's red light clicked and settled into a rhythm that matched nothing human. Devon, who was never rude on purpose, held up the spirit box and asked, can you show yourself in the light? And that was the thing that took it too far. The air moved against us again, deliberate breath with that sweet barn smell and that metallic tang that made my mouth water in a way that wasn't hunger. There was a scrape of something near the rail, and the bell that Mia had laid down tipped and rolled until it hit the chalk and stopped and then lifted. We watched it lift. It rose slowly as if through a liquid medium we weren't aware of, as if it had to push something out of the way to achieve its height. It turned once, and you could see where a goat's strap would have worn into that leather oval over years. The bell hung in the air, then it jutted toward Devon's chest, and the chime inside struck once, and the sound was not a gentle thing. It was a sharp sound like a nail being driven into wood. Devon yelped and dropped the spirit box, and it hit the planks and screamed static. The bell fell and landed on its rim and spun like a coin. The circle of chalk was wiped in a new arc, not like a foot had dragged but like something wider and stranger had moved. Something that did not decide between hoof and heel but borrowed both. Mia said, I am sorry, again, louder, and her voice shook hard enough to make the apology feel like a rope thrown that might or might not catch. The recorder clicked on its tripod. It wasn't a sound I had ever heard it make. The thing did not click, it recorded. But it clicked now like a throat clearing. We have a rule on Lone Star Shadows, which is if one person says we go, we go. No arguments and no revisiting. Mia was the one who said it. She said we should go now, and her hand found my elbow with a grip that carried more than fear. It carried warning. I nodded and stepped back, and my heel touched nothing because I had misjudged the space, and for a half second I felt my balance pitch toward the rail, the open, the creak. Something pushed against my back then, not a shove and not gentle. a firm palm between my shoulders. The movement stopped, and my weight settled onto the board with a protest from the wood that sounded like a groan from a sleeping house. I did not thank whatever had done that. I did not want to make a covenant. We backed toward the trail, keeping our lights down, which is a thing you do instinctively around animals and people you don't want to startle. The recorder stayed where it was clicking and ticking. I left it because there was an unspoken sense that it belonged to the bridge now, that there was a line I would not cross to get it. And if Devin had gone for it, I would have grabbed him and dragged him away. Devin did not go. He kept his hands up like he was walking away from cop lights. Mia had her mouth open like she was trying to pull more air in, like there was not enough oxygen under the iron. The trail felt longer going back. The trees leaned more. The dog we had passed earlier barked and then yelped in a way that raised the hair on my arms. Somewhere behind us the bell struck once more. It made the sound of a decision. We moved faster. The parking lot appeared in the beam like a little island, and the Civic truck was gone. The world beyond the park had not shifted to meet what we had just walked through. The road still curved, and the highway still rushed. I opened the car and we folded ourselves in, silent as if the door slams would call something that wanted to ride back with us. When I turned the key, the radio cracked into life with a station that we never listened to, and in that instant before I turned it off I heard a man's voice say my name in the cadence of a morning host. There was laughter beneath it, and the laughter was too slow. No one talked until we were on 380, and the trees gave way to car lots and waffle houses, and the glow of Denton's downtown like the town was holding fireflies in a jar. Devin said we have to go back for the recorder and made a noise like a laugh, but it was not. Mia said we are not going back tonight, and we are not going back at all if you ask me. And then she pressed her knuckles into her eyes and breathed like someone way older than us. I said things to be reasonable. I said maybe an animal had gotten on the bridge and we spooked it. I said maybe the bell was caught on a spider web and the air moved it. I said maybe the spirit box was picking up a station from God knows where. Devin said where the hell was the station with just my name on it. I didn't answer and no one mentioned that nudge between my shoulders. The car smelled like we had been in the sun too long with the windows up like fabric, and breath, and something faint and sweet that wasn't ours. I dropped them both at home and waved and promised I would text and then did not. I went to my house in a neighborhood that had grown up on clay and big hopes, houses with garages that stuck out like chins. Mom had left the porch light on and a bowl of quartered peaches on the kitchen counter under a towel because she had a thing for fruit that felt like summer. The house had its usual noises. The fridge had a rattle, and the air conditioner did that little click when it settled on a speed. I washed my face and brushed my teeth and looked at my reflection and saw a kid with matching circles under each eye and a little redness on the skin between the brows where worry liked to make a home. When I turned out the light and lay down, I knew sleep was an intention, not a plan. At 2 in the morning the house settled. It is a real thing the way houses flex when the temperature changes, the way wood and nail and drywall sigh into themselves. I have heard it all my life and classified it under harmless. I lay there and sorted familiar sounds. Then there was one that did not fit. It came from the hallway, and it was so faint that I tilted my head to confirm it. A soft clop. It was smaller than what we heard on the bridge, like whatever made it had learned something about making less noise. I told myself it was the dog next door. I told myself it was a branch knocking the roof in a weird way. I did not get up. The second clop came from just outside my bedroom door. The third came from behind it, and the door wasn't the thing that separated us anymore. It was breath. The hay and the copper came into my room and laid themselves across my face and chest like an animal in winter, heavy and close. The hairs on my arms lifted and my eyes watered. In that smell was the memory of the 4-H fair in Louisville when I was 7. The goat pens and the sweet feed and the way the animals looked at you with slotted eyes that did not blink in the way you expect. In it was the memory of pennies on my tongue from a loose tooth, that salt metal flavor that is as old as injury. I did something stupid and said hello. It was barely in the air before I regretted it. Because saying hello is an invitation. The breath moved. It went from my face to my ear, and the whisper that came with it wasn't a voice so much as a pressure that shaped itself into words against the bones of my head. It said you heard me, and then it said you will keep hearing me. The syllables had a cadence like footsteps on planks. I sat up and reached for the lamp and pulled the chain and blessed the cheap metal for working. The room flooded with a light that showed me it was empty, and as soon as my eyes confirmed there was no shape to anchor my fear to, the fight in me came back. I stood and went to the door and opened it and put my head out into the hall and listened. The house smelled like my mother's laundry detergent, and not like a barn. The air had no copper in it. The strangeness was gone. I stood there too long. Mom called from her room and asked if everything was okay, and I said I had leg cramps, and she told me to drink water. I drank and went back to bed and lay on top of the covers in the lamplight like a child. Sometime near dawn I slept. I woke late, and the sun was high and mean and determined to remind everyone it was August. I checked my phone and saw 3 messages. Devin at 1:19 said my lights flickered and would not stop, and then they did, and now my fish died. He sent a photo of the tank with the guppy's belly up like a tiny flotilla. Mia at 2:03 said my boots were muddy, and they were by the door where I left them. Then at 3:41 she sent just the bell emoji. I didn't like that and I wrote, "Are you okay?" and she wrote back, "Sure," with a thumb, and then a minute later wrote, "This is weird, but I can smell something and it's not in the kitchen." I went to the sink and looked out the window, and my reflection looked back, and although this is impossible, I will tell you what I saw. My face was my face, tired and young. The space behind me in the glass had a shape in it too tall and wrong to be a man. 2 points higher than a head, like the idea of horns. When I turned around fast, there was nothing in the kitchen but a bowl with the pits from last night's peaches, and the knife we always tell each other not to leave in the sink. I drove back to the bridge in the afternoon with the sun high enough to make me feel like a cowardless agent, like the dark had been the culprit all along. I told myself I was going for the recorder. I told myself I would reset whatever we had jostled by doing something sensible. The park was more crowded than I wanted. There were joggers and a lady with a stroller and 2 teenagers who looked younger than me, and who were already sweating through their shirts. The iron of the bridge looked less like a rib cage and more like a child's drawing of a crown. All triangles pointing up at a sky that did not care. There were dried flowers tied to the rail where someone had died in the news last spring in a drunk driving thing on the road nearby. I stepped onto the planks and they made their usual noises. The chalk circle was not there because it was chalk and shoes do what they do. The spot in the middle where we had left the recorder had a dark stain like oil. The recorder was not there. There were 2 hoofprints in that place, clear as if someone had pressed iron into the wood. Except they were not horseshoes. The shape was cloven. The edges were sharp. The depth said wait. A man in a park employee polo came onto the bridge and did not look at the marks. He walked past me and told a couple not to climb the trusses, and the couple apologized and laughed and kissed in a way that felt like a seal pressed onto wax. He looked at me then and asked if I was okay. I said yes, and he nodded and moved on. I bent down and touched the print with 1 finger and it came away clean. The indentation was real. The impression had been made by something heavier than the bridge wanted to consider, and then the wood had accepted it and stopped complaining. I stood up and something in the corner of my eye moved where nothing should be moving, and I felt the old breath at the back of my neck again, and the sunshine didn't matter. I walked fast back down the trail to the parking lot and didn't run because there were people, and you don't run unless everyone runs. At home, Mia posted a clip from the night before, a short video in our group chat. She had not filmed much, but she had pointed her phone at the recorder at some point, and had caught a few seconds before we had gotten smart. The clip was shaky. The bell lay on its side. The spirit box hissed and coughed. There was the first clop, and our overlapping laughs. There was the second, and you could see the plank vibrate. There was the third, and my exhale that was not a word. Then there was something else I had not noticed in the moment. A low sound, like a voice pulled through mud, saying not just go. It said come back. It stretched the words like we were far away in a long tunnel. It made the hairs on my neck lift again in a way that had nothing to do with air or temperature. Mia wrote, "Do not play this out loud," and I turned my phone volume up because I am sometimes exactly as dumb as the things in stories deserve. That night the clopping started before midnight. It came down the hall like an address. I lay there in the dark because I had promised myself not to give it light, not to feed it with acknowledgement. The smell seeped under my door, and into my mouth, and into the cotton of my pillowcase like a stain that washing would never get out. There was whispering again, forming not in the air but inside the part of your head where childhood counts your mother's footsteps and knows how many before she reaches your room. It said I liked the bridge you brought me, and it sounded satisfied. I did not answer. It said say my name, and I will show you what they saw. It said we will go where the wood hangs over the water, and I will count with you and I will take the last step with your weight in my hand. I said no, because something in me found its center then. I said you are not in my house. I said this is not for you. I said Oscar's name gently and with respect, because if something wore him like a coat, then I would not be fooled by his boots. Silence answered, and then the smallest clop, like a child pressing a toy onto a table. It came from under my bed. My breath stalled, and then the air in the room filled with a panic so pure it burned. I pulled my feet up without thinking, and hated that I did because it felt like an acknowledgement. The room made itself smaller. The next sound was a click from my phone, as a notification popped, and I grabbed at it because anything human was a rope. It was a text from Devin that said my mom heard it too, and she is praying and I do not think she believes me even while she prays. I typed back tell her to stop inviting things when she says amen, unless she means it, and that was not my voice, and I deleted it, and wrote, are you okay instead. It did not end that night. It did not end the night after. It did not end when Mia brought her boots into the yard and poured bleach into the seams, and then put them in the trash, and then went out after dark and pulled them back out because she said she felt wrong leaving them for someone else to put on by accident. It did not end when Devin carried his fish tank into the same yard and the water sloshed and flashed and he poured it slow into the grass because his mother said do not flood the rosemary. It did not end when I drove to Dallas to stay at my cousin's apartment and thought the city sounds would drown it, because the clop came anyway, and the breath came, and the voice laid itself along the theater of the radiator hiss, and the neighbor's music like a ribbon. The thing that changed it was the bridge. I went back in the daylight with a bolt cutter I had no right to use, and a bag. The locks on the rail shone where hands had polished them with hope and sun. I looked at the names and the dates and the hearts and the words always and remember, and I wanted to be kind. Instead I found the little rope doll that had swung, and the square of wood with the burned name and the bracelets wrapped around the bicycle. I cut one lock that had fresh initials, the metal soft with newness, and I put it in the bag with the doll and the wooden square. I did not know what I was doing, and I did it anyway. I walked down to the edge of the creek where there was a little path kids used to get under the bridge to write their initials on the concrete footers, and I emptied the bag there and said to the water and the iron and whatever was paying attention that I would not barter with other people's wishes. I took a match and lit the rope doll and held it till it burned too hot, and then I let it go and it fell into a patch of damp and hissed. The smell of it was wrong and old and sweet. My eyes watered. I thought I heard a voice in the hiss say that is not mine, and I said I know, and then I said if we took you we will take you back. The bridge made no sound except the usual creaks. The weeds along the creek buzzed with things that were alive and uncomplicated. I could not take my recorder back because it was not there. I could not call back the breath that had settled into my pillows. The only thing left was to do the thing you do when you trespass and are finally ready to leave. You back away without turning your back, and you speak gently, and you say I am going now and I will not call you anymore. The last night it visited me, I was asleep, and I woke to the third clop behind my head, something stepping into my room like it owned the boards. The breath came warm and full of that barn and that blood, and in it I smelled rain. It is an old smell in Texas when you smell rain before it gets to you. The wind carrying it low, the sky promising it. I rolled to my side and sat up and I did not turn on the light. The silhouette in the window was a pair of points like the suggestion of horns and a body that didn't make sense in human proportions. And if you want me to say I saw eyes, I will tell you I did not, because what I saw was worse. I saw places where eyes would be if this were a person. The voice pressed itself against the inside of my skull and said take me back, and it said my name in a way no radio host could ever approach. It had an intimacy in it that made my stomach turn. It said you will put your feet where I put mine, and you will not step aside, and I will not let you fall, and at the end of the bridge there will be a foot they have not heard yet. I don't know what instrument plays the song of stupidity that teenagers call bravery. I know I got in my car and drove at 3 in the morning to a place where even the cops do not linger. I know Mia was there standing at the trailhead with her headlamp already on her head, as if she had been told the same thing. I know Devin came up behind me with his spirit box in a backpack like it was going to matter. We did not say it had told us. We did not say it had stepped under our beds. We put one foot and then the other on the boards, and the night exhaled, and the bridge accepted our weight like a boat accepts rain. In the dark you count steps. It's part curse and part comfort. 30 to get to the middle. Fewer if you're long-legged, more if you're carrying something you can't name. We did not count out loud. The clop came in between our feet like a beat, one that was not ours, a metronome set by a hand we could not see. Somewhere a bell answered, not the one Mia had carried, but a bell that lived here. It gave the measure, and we met it. The breath was close, a chest pressed to our backs, and then moving ahead of us, and then alongside, as if it had a body that could choose. Mia whispered Oscar once, and then did not again. Devin's mouth clicked in the way it does when he is trying not to cry. The thing that moved with us spoke in the shape of words I will not write because I do not know if writing is calling. It promised us a last footfall that would shake the story loose from its spine. We reached the middle where the chalk was gone and the boards were marked. The creek below sucked at its banks and something heavy rolled in the water below like a log turning. I felt the press between my shoulder blades again, that hand that kept me from falling, and I wanted to turn and see what kind of mercy could come from a thing that breathed hay and copper. The clop stepped ahead of us and then stopped. For a second the world turned on a hinge, and everything we had carried there tilted. I put my foot forward, and felt the board below me not accept it. There is a particular sensation of wood giving. It is the same in porch steps, and cheap bleachers and old bridges. It tries to tell you with words like bounce, and flex, and then with a noise like an old man's knees. The plank's nails squealed, and the next plank did something worse. It did not just flex, it wanted to leave. I grabbed for Mia, and my hand closed on her forearm, and it was slick with sweat and strong. Devin grabbed my backpack, and for a second we were a chain. And then the thing that had promised not to let me fall put its weight into the promise, and I moved forward and the board held. The third clop happened then, not behind us but under the water. The creak made a sound like acceptance. A shape passed beneath that made the darkness thicker. The promise had been kept. We did not earn it. We did not deserve it. It was not kindness, it was a claim. We crossed the rest of the way without counting. On the far side, on dirt and not wood, we stopped and breathed the kind of breath you breathe when you live without considering it a gift, the kind you forget to be thankful for. Behind us the bridge creaked, and then it sighed, and then it made one last noise that did not belong to wood or iron. It was a clop, a final one. A sound that accepted the weight that had walked with us and did not need to make the return trip. It was the last footfall of Old Olton, not because the bridge is done with people, but because that step had finally found its place. It landed, and the night around us shivered, and then grew quiet in the way of places that have been fed. We walked back to the car and did not talk, and did not look at the water that kept its own counsel. The air smelled like mesquite and something clean, as if the hay had burned off the breath and left only the metal. In the days that followed, the clopping did not come to our halls. The breath did not settle in our sheets. The voice did not press into our skulls. In the edits from that night, what you hear is us being small and the creek being itself, and the moment where the spirit box ate its own static and made a sound like a bell underwater. Mia deleted the clip where my name gets said. Devin stopped trying to find the frequency. I stopped writing scripts that made sense of things that did not care for sense. If you go to Old Alton Bridge now, and walk across under the day or the night, the boards will talk to you in their old ways. The locks will flash their rusted teeth. The bicycle will gain bracelets and lose them. Someone will chalk a circle, and someone else will scuff it. If you listen carefully at the middle, there is a place where the wood is marked a little deeper than it should be. If you put your palm there, you might feel something slow and low that you will want to call a heartbeat. It will not be yours. If you are the kind of person who calls things out like a homework assignment, you will not be answered the way you want. Something crossed there once with us, and it put its boots down where a legend walks on cloven feet. It counted, and it let the last step land where it had been floating for too long, suspended over a creek that eats everything eventually. We were not brave. We were not chosen. We were simply there when an old weight decided it was time to stop. I like to think we did not carry it home anymore after that. But sometimes in the grocery store when the cartwheel wobbles on the tile and makes a sound like a bell in miniature, I find myself looking down the aisle like there will be a shape there too tall and wrong, waiting for me to say hello again. And sometimes at night, when the house settles and the boards make their tired music, I count steps without meaning to, and I resist the urge to make space by stepping aside. Because if there is one thing I learned on that bridge, it is that not every promise that keeps you on your feet is a favor. Some promises are a weight that changes where you think the ground is, and when the last footfall finds its home, the echo left behind is yours to live with. The first time it happened, it was late June, and the heat had already gone brittle. The kind that burns off the dew by 8 and leaves the live oaks looking singed by noon. He was crawling east along I-10 between Shirts and Seguin, thinking about an email he hadn't answered, and a $4 Dr. Pepper sweating in the cup holder. The air conditioner rattled like it always did when he cranked it to max, blowing that faint sour smell of old plastic and highway dust. The radio was low and tinny on KSTX, a voice talking about a drought map inching red across South Texas. He saw the brown water of Woman Hollering Creek flash under the bridge, more a ditch than a creek, a slit in the berm crowded with ragweed, and a white sign with black letters that always seemed to be a joke until you realized it wasn't. Woman Hollering Creek. He had tried to picture a woman standing there, cupping hands to mouth, shouting herself hoarse into the rush hour roar. The idea had made him smile. Then it came through the vents, thin at first, like a whistle in the fan blades. He nudged the knob back and forth, thinking a leaf had gotten into the blower, and the pitch went up and down with the speed of the air. He kept driving. The sound wove itself into the noise of the tires and the radio, and he told himself it was nothing, and also found himself turning the radio up to bury it. He left the freeway past the Buc-ee's billboard with the cartoon beaver telling him about brisket, looped south onto Highway 90, and the noise kept drawing small careful lines on the inside of his ears. He pulled into his lot in Seguin, and when he killed the engine, it stopped, as if a switch had been thrown. He sat for a moment in the quiet heat, sweat starting on his neck, and glanced at the rear view out of habit. There was nothing to see but the brush of his own hand as he grabbed his bag and went inside. On the second morning, it was there when he turned on the AC, and by the time he shot under the Woman Hollering Bridge it was clearer. It wasn't the whistle of a leaf. It was a voice trying to be a whistle. It was a mouth pressed so close to the grill that you could picture teeth catching on the slats. He felt his scalp tighten at the first stretch of it, at the wet and drawn-out shape of it, like someone trying to call a dog in the rain. He adjusted the vents to point away from his face, and a little laugh came out of him because it was ridiculous to feel you could angle a voice, but he did it anyway. He drove with his shoulders up around his ears, hardly breathing. At the big interchanges, where the ramps loop like knots and the trucks lean, the voice climbed a little. When he merged back onto open highway it flattened. He told himself something was wrong with the blower motor. He told himself there was some little whistle, and the road noise masked the rest. On the third day, he took it to a place in Seguin, where a man named Saul with shoulders like a refrigerator squinted at the problem. Saul listened with his head near the dash, put the fan through its 4 speeds, then shut it off and said he'd pull the blower housing. He found a spray of cedar needles, and a button battery that must have rolled God knows how, and a coil of hair the size of a rattler's rattle that made them both say an involuntary noise. Saul asked if he'd driven with a window down, if maybe a bag had torn open. He asked in that helpful way mechanics have when they're making their best guess at the universe inside your car. He vacuumed. He sprayed something that smelled like eucalyptus and formaldehyde. He buttoned it up and said, "Try it now." The fan spun smooth and silent, and the air came on cold enough to fog his sunglasses. He shook Saul's hand and drove away in relief. He made it to I-10, past the stone BBQ joint with the giant smoke-stained pit and the green tin awning, past the line of billboards with lawyers smiling thinly at the horizon, and when he hit the creek, the fog on his lenses lifted, and he heard her again. It was a single note held too long, like a flute played with a shaking breath. It came and went, and it was inside the vents. He switched to recirculate, then to fresh air, then closed the vents and pointed them at the floor. The note grew. He killed the AC entirely. The note became a woman. It was a strange and immediate change. The whine a moment before was only a shape, something you could pretend belonged to a hinge or a belt. But when the fan died, and the cabin fell hot and still, the sound came in full, as if he'd opened not a vent but a door. It flooded the car without bouncing off anything, without echo. It came in clean. His chest tight went tighter. It wasn't words. It was the alarming pure body of a human noise, like what you hear in a hospital hallway when someone has been told something that can't be taken back. He fumbled for the radio, and then stopped, because putting something over that sound felt like putting a hand on a mouth. When he looked in the rear view, he saw the back window fogging in the center. It was narrow at first, a little oval about the size of a face, as if someone had leaned forward out of the back seat and breathed on the glass. The fog spread thin and milky, and he watched a curved line grow as if traced by a finger. It was slow and steady and wrong, because the finger was on the outside, and the mark was on the inside. The first line bent and curved into a shape like a J. The second line parallel to it. They were not letters, they were the arcs left by a palm being dragged downward. They ended in 4 small dots, not fingerprints, smaller. He took the next exit too fast. The tires barked on the concrete, and someone behind him leaned on their horn. He saw a field spanning, round bales like toppled spools of thread, turned into a Valero, whose pumps wore yellow sleeves over half their heads. He idled in the corner of the lot under a dusty crepe myrtle, and waited, breathing through his mouth. The wail went on, then faded, then went on again with that unsentimental regularity that made him think whatever was making it didn't care whether he heard it or not. The fog thinned. He wiped it with the back of his hand. The smear it left smelled like the low bottom of the river, like iron and old leaves. He told himself about legends, as if they were mints you take on an airplane. His grandmother had told him about La Llorona once, in a kitchen in El Paso. The air loud with swamp coolers and summer. A ghost story about a woman in white who drowned her children, and then herself, and then walked the arroyos forever, wailing for what she had done. He'd nodded like a kid, nods at a story told by an older person, a nod that means I will never need this and may forget it before I finish this cookie. Years later, when he saw the sign for Woman Hollering Creek, he'd thought about La Llorona, because it lay so neatly over the weird official whimsy of the name, something folkloric under the county font. People joked about it on Facebook. You could buy a hoodie. The creek itself, when you drove past, was usually candy wrapper dry, a brown throat at the bottom of a green gash. You could tell yourself nothing could be in that. You could tell yourself anything. For a while he tried to outsmart it by timing his commute differently. He left before dawn one morning, and watched the high white cloud of interstate lighting paint the lanes as the sky went slate blue. He drank coffee that tasted like old pennies from a travel mug that had known too many dishwashers. He had the fan on low and a podcast turned up. The first jackrabbits were still out along the shoulder, frozen in the moment you saw them, then releasing like rubber bands into the brush. When he crossed the creek, the voice rose thin and sure, and for the first time he thought he heard words in it. They were the shape of Spanish without being Spanish. They moved like a prayer and reversed like a curse. He felt the hair stand behind his ears. He kept driving with both hands hard enough on the wheel to make a tremor in his wrist. And when he got to work, he went straight to the men's room, and locked himself in a stall and sat with his head in his hands until he could breathe without bubbling. Another evening, after it had been a week and he felt slept through, he waited until the traffic died, and took the access road that curved down under the overpass and ran along the creek. It was still daylight, and the heat of the day had settled low like an argument that hadn't been resolved. The creek lay quiet in its ditch, a brown mirror under the tangle of salt cedar and grapevine. He went down to the concrete embankment anyway, the place where kids could leave tags and a man might stand to fish when the water was up. He listened. The only sound was the sigh of far highway, and the small cricket scratch of his own shoes. A yellow grocery bag hung on a weed, stiff with dirt. He waited until the light went away, and then he heard it again, not in the air but in the hollow of his chest, as if his lungs were picking it up and pouring it into his throat. He went back to the car quickly, and when he climbed in, the back window bloomed and shrank like a lung. The mechanic didn't have any better ideas the second time. He checked the cabin filter. He checked for leaks. He said to try running without recirculate, and then said the opposite. He said it with a look that said he wanted to be helpful and felt as if he was lying. That afternoon he sat at his desk in a low gray box under fluorescent hum, listening to the background cough of other men typing, and he felt like a man who'd brought a live animal to work hidden under his jacket and couldn't let anyone know. He looked up the creek online and found a story about how it got its name. About a woman who supposedly had shouted with joy or rage. The article had it both ways because people like a story to be two things at once. He found a map that showed the creek's course like a green vein running under the freeway and out into the country. He zoomed in until the pixels broke apart. He pressed his fingers into the edge of his desk to feel something that wasn't soft and uncertain and old. He told himself he would not listen to it. He drove with the air on full blast and songs turned up so loud the bass rattled the spare change in the ashtray. He made phone calls with the Bluetooth and found himself speaking too loudly to his sister about nothing at all. He called a woman he'd been seeing and then not seeing and heard himself boast a little about a new client his team had landed. He heard her laugh like a spoon in a teacup and felt both threaded through and bored by it. At the creak the sound came on anyway and took the thread out of whatever he was saying and left it flapping. He passed a state trooper parked under the overpass and the scene presence of authority didn't reach him. The wail went up like wind in a pipe. He shut the air off and it swelled. He remembered, suddenly and bodily, a night 6 months before when the rain had come down in a way that felt unfair, when his wipers had been slicing white water and his headlights made a curtain of it. He had seen the standing water gather at the low places and felt his car push as if weighted by hands. He had crossed a place where the road dipped and known it was the creek only because of the sign. He had seen a pickup half off the embankment with its hazard lights punching the rain. He had passed because there were other lights ahead and red brake lamps like a lit runway, and the weight of the water had sat on his car like a thing. He had told himself it wasn't safe to stop, that he couldn't pull over in the flood and become a second stuck car and make everything worse. He had gone home and microwave warmed a burrito and watched the local news for flood rescues and felt his muscles unwind. He remembered now, with the wail in the car, a flash of white in the side window, a shape like a dress or a trash bag, something a body could be underneath. He remembered thinking about it, and then choosing not to. He felt that choice now like a coin in his mouth. The next day he left work late to avoid the worst traffic, and it punished him by giving him a sky like a old bruise, purple around the edges and yellow in the middle. The air smelled charged, that metallic smell before a storm that makes your tongue tacky. He thought about pulling a motel in shirts and having a beer in a place with neon and men in caps pretending not to look at their phones. He got on the freeway instead, and the first hot drops slapped and spread. The wipers worked and did not work. It was the kind of rain that exists like language, a collection of pieces that add up to something larger and inescapable. The trucks went cautious, which made them more frightening. He closed the vents and ran the defroster and told himself he would not be afraid, and the voice sang under all of it, calm as a thread through cloth. At the creek the water had come up. You could not see it, but you could feel it by the way the bridge felt under the wheels, a soft give that concrete should not have. He saw red lights, and then he saw that the access road on the far side had a line of cars pulled over with their hoods up as if in supplication. He wanted to get past and be away. The voice rose until it felt like it was being made by his own teeth. He shut the air off, as if to starve it. The car fogged at once. The rear window whited, then gray, then wet. He saw in the mirror the same patient finger. He did not think. He slammed the heel of his hand into the rear view to twist it up toward the headliner so he did not have to watch. Something touched his ear. He swore and pawed at nothing, almost drifted into the next lane, then corrected so hard the tires hissed. The touch came again, slow and exploring, like the pads of wet fingers. He squeezed his jaw and felt tears in the corners of his eyes, which he thought of as something children did, which he did not want to be. He blew the defroster and it fought the fog and made a small clear place in the windshield like a porthole. Through it he saw the midnight of the interstate, the scene where the new asphalt met the old, the card pink flash of a trooper's lights under the bridge. He saw the creek in one single handspan of moving world, and it looked like nothing but the night. He took the exit and followed the access road down by habit, as if some part of him had decided a long time ago and was only now telling him. The rain was too much for the little road. It sheened the concrete into the soft round of a river rock. He passed a strip of caliche where a roadside shrine had stood until the sun bleached it and the wind took it apart. The water lay in the ditch like oil. He pulled up into the mouth of the underpass and stopped with the engine idling and the car smelling of his own fear. He shut everything off. At once the wail was in the car, not like sound but like light or heat, a condition of the air. He put his hand on the key and did not take it out. He listened and understood that nothing he had taken for words had been words. He understood that some of the lines on the glass were not being made by a single hand. There were the arcs of a bigger palm, and there were the 4 uneven commas of smaller ones. He thought of a bathtub. He thought of the color of the water when you wash a thing too long. He sat in the dark and did not breathe for a long time, and when he did the breath broke and skipped. He opened his door because the idea of staying felt like inviting something in. The rain hit him slantwise and cold and clean. The world was bright and chaotic, and you could believe in anything in it. He stepped into water that wasn't deep and then was deeper, so quickly it made a sound in his throat. He went up the embankment by the bridge with his shoes slipping, and the wet running to his elbows. He stood on a concrete lip under the sign for the creek and tried not to look down at it. The water moved like something alive in a skin. It carried leaves and cups and a long gray thing that might have been a trash bag or might not. It made a noise that had in it a laugh and a threat. He shouted without meaning to for anyone to hear him, and his voice vanished into the weather like a dropped penny. She stood in the gap the rain made, that trick of hard water where there is no rain because the bridge is above you. She stood where it is half night and half day. He hadn't seen her come because there was nowhere to come from. She was not the woman in white you expect when you are a child hearing a story in a kitchen. She was wet from the hair to the hem in a way that turned her into one thing. It was not a dress. It was not anything you could call an article of clothing. It was water, and it carried sticks and grass pressed to it by its own weight. Her hair was sealed to her face, and her face shone under it as if it had its own light. In the slope of her shoulder, in the set of her mouth, he saw a woman too tired to sleep. She lifted her head and made the sound he had heard in his car, but without the muffle of plastic and fan blades. It had an edge like a blade. It was not loud enough to be loud. It was exact. He said, "I am sorry." He said it as if he were in church and had suddenly remembered how to pray. The rain around the bridge mouth laughed its hard laugh. She watched him watching her. And when she took a step, the water took one with her. He backed to the wall and put his palms against the cool, rough concrete, like a man being searched. He wanted to say he had tried. He wanted to say it had been unsafe. He wanted to say he had a daughter once who would be 17 now if she had not lived to be 9. He wanted to say the thing in his chest that had cracked, then had never knit clean. He realized he could not tell the difference between these wants. He thought he had not thought of his daughter for whole weeks on end. And then he understood he had thought of her every time he had turned the air on and off to make or unmake a sound he could not bear. She came closer. The water cupped her ankles, and the little running things that float in running water bumped and turned. He did not know if her eyes were open or shut. He understood there were no children standing behind her. He understood the marks on the glass had not been left by hands in his car, but had been the only way she could show him what it is to have a hand held by something you love underwater. He understood that the sound had never been meant for him, and had also always been meant for him. Because roads take you where they take you, and lay their lines over old ones. He understood this not with his brain, but with the part of a person that knots and unknots itself, and decides when you are safe. He went down the slope until the water came up over his shins and made his pants heavy. The current caught and tugged at him, the way a child tugs when they want to go another way. He thought for a second that she would take him down and he would go wherever it is people go in brown water, spinning slowly like cottonwood seeds in reverse. She reached with a hand that was not a hand. It was a shape that made a shape on the air. It touched his throat the way a mother touches a fever. He moved without thinking because not thinking was easier than thinking, and stepped to the side and out from under the bridge's shelter and into the straight down of the rain. It pounded him flat and good. He let it. He walked to his car like a man who has been allowed up from a table. He climbed in and sat with his wet clothes leaking into the seat, and he turned the key, and when the engine caught, he cried because it was loud and alive and normal. He switched the air on and off and nothing came. He switched it again and again, like a man with a light switch ensuring darkness is still darkness when he commands it. The voice did not come. The windows stayed clear. He drove home in that unsteady way you do when the adrenaline is seeping away and leaving your muscles rubbery. At stoplights he looked in the rear view despite himself. There was only the green wash of the signal. He went on. On the radio a woman spoke calmly about reservoirs, like she was telling him about bread. He turned it up and left it up. In the shallow flood under his house a frog spoke once and then did not speak again. In the morning the world was scrubbed to its bones. The sky had that cheap blue you can't trust because you know what it looks like when it goes black. He left early to see if anything would happen now that nothing had happened. At the creek there was still water. It ran high and milked with mud and carried a football and a pail, something too round to be a head and too sad to be anything else. He eased across and the car made the small clicks and ticks of things cooling and moving. The vents blew what they had always blown, which was air. He laughed, a small voiceless thing, and then he shut the air off, and for 1 second the car was absolutely still. In that stillness he heard a new sound, like a woman taking a breath after screaming for a very long time. It wasn't in the vents. It was behind him at a distance that could have been 3 feet or 3 miles. He checked the mirror out of habit and saw nothing, only his own moving face. He thought of a lesson learned or unlearned. He thought of distance. He thought of the cold hand that had touched his throat like a thermometer. He drove on. He drove past fields that had turned greener overnight as if someone had taken a marker to them. He drove under a sky with the sun at the angle that makes everything look like it's being gently forgivable. He turned the AC back on and it made the solid happy sound of air moving through a thing built to move it. It filled the car with the smell of it, which was a smell like nothing. He glanced again at the mirror and looked away because he made himself look away because looking had never done him any good. He promised himself in the ordinary voice he used when promising himself to pick up milk that he would not go down to the creek anymore. He would not stop under the bridge. He would not try to be brave in the way that makes men fools. He put his hand on the wheel and kept it there and pretended he did not feel the cool print on his throat where fingers had not been. A mile past the sign for Marion he came up behind a school bus braking at every driveway. He rolled off onto a farm road to get around and found himself on a stretch of black top with no shoulder. The ditches full and shining. The tires sang thinly. The road went up and down like the back of an animal. He crested one rise and saw the water lying across the next dip, shining flat and innocent. There were no barricades. He slowed and considered and thought of the announcer on the radio saying, "Turn around. Don't drown," in that chirpy way they have when telling you how not to die. He smiled at the phrase because it was foolish, and then his smile slid away because in the center of the sheet of water stood a woman in the same way a nail stands in wood. She did not wave. She did not look at him. She watched the surface of the water at her knees as if expecting to see her face in it. He stopped with his bumper just kissing the shine. He rolled down his window because that felt like respect. He said hello and used the kind of voice you use for stray dogs, friendly but not too much. She did not turn or raise her head, but the water around her made a different sound, like a throat clearing. It seemed to him that her dress was not a dress at all but water having decided to be a dress for the space of one breath. It seemed to him he could see through her to the roots of the bar ditch grass. It seemed to him that the air in the car was colder than air can be without being a thing you can see. And for a second before he could stop himself he thought of his daughter's hair streaming when she went under by accident. At Landa Flats, how it had been beautiful, how the light had made it lines of bronze on brown water, how he had dragged her out by the straps of her little life jacket and she had coughed up a sheet of river like a magician pulling out scarves and had laughed because she was pure unafraid then. He leaned his head against the cool ring of the open window and felt the tick of rain begin again. Just the first exploratory scouts. He said, "I am sorry," and meant it. The woman in the water didn't move. The wail he had heard for days was not here. It was in the rear view again instead, a soft steam blooming and the same small patient fingers drawing arcs that ended in 4 tiny comets. He looked once and the shape seared itself into him the way the red glow of a cigarette will if you stare dead on. He reached back without looking and wiped the glass hard with his palm as if force could smear the shape into nothing. The smear smelled like the creek and like his daughter's hair when she would come out of the Guadalupe in summer and let the sun dry the last drops on her shoulders. He put the car in reverse and backed away because there was nothing else to do. Because a grown man can only sit in a car watching a thing for so long before it becomes something that is happening to him instead of being watched. He turned around and took the long way. He did not look in the mirror for the rest of that day's drive. He told himself later, with the daily lie we require to move forward from one moment to the next, that the handprints were his own. He told himself that the smell was the mildew of a Texas car in a Texas summer. He told himself he had done what he could. He told himself that the creek had always been called what it is called because of someone else's hollering in someone else's time. And yet, On a night a week later, when the heat broke for a few hours, as if someone had let a door stand open to another country, he woke to a sound not unlike the way a child cries when it is trying not to wake anyone and failing. He don't know if it came from the vents. He don't know if it came from behind his house where the shallow drainage cut through his neighbor's crabgrass. He stood at the kitchen window with the light off and knew he could go out into the yard and stand by the fence and call into the low dark. He did not. He put his forehead to the cool of the glass. His breath made a shape there. He dragged his fingers down and left arcs and 4 small dots at the end by habit, because once you have been shown how a thing is held you cannot hold it any other way. He stood there like that until the sound thinned and went away, not because it had grown tired but because it had been heard enough. In the morning the glass was clean and bright, and the world went on chopping itself into errands and lanes and signs. He drove past woman hollering creak and did not touch the air controls, and in the mirror the world came and went without revealing anything except the long truth of the road, which is that it takes you over water whether you know it or not, and that something always waits in the low places for those who do and those who do not stop. The night I decided to cut through the south side, the sky over San Antonio looked like it had been poured into a skillet and left to crust. The heat didn't break just because the sun went down. It pressed against the windshield and crept through the vents, a damp hand on the back of my neck. I had put in 12 hours on a job over by the Toyota plant off Applewhite, fixing a bulky conveyor for a contractor who was 2 months behind paying me. He slipped me a check late, a promise wrapped in a signature, and I didn't feel like riding I-35 under the orange lights and watching drunks drift across the lanes, so I told myself the side roads would be faster. You tell yourself things like that at midnight, with a warm beer sweating in the cup holder, and your back itching like a rash. You tell yourself legends are campfire nonsense, and a shortcut saved is a little victory. It wasn't like I hadn't heard it. Everyone who grows up in San Antonio on this side of town knows about the bridge. The Donkey Lady Bridge isn't on a map with a star, but if you live here you could drive to it on muscle memory. Applewhite Road wanders through Mesquite and scrubs south of Loop 410 until it crouches over the Medina River, which leaves the hill country skinny and brown and slides past the old missions like a worn belt. The bridge is low and narrow, concrete patched and patched again, chain link clinging to the rails like last year's vines. People say there was a woman back in the 1800s whose husband tried to kill her and their kids, that the fire made a muzzle of her face and fused her hands, that she screamed through the trees with a sound like a mule. People say she's still there where the road bends, and the trees overhang the water. You go out late, you heckle the dark, you honk and slap the hood, and if you're lucky she leaves you with a story. If you're not, she leaves you with less. I followed Applewhite where it darkens and the streetlights give up. The Toyota plant fell behind me, a blue gauze of light against the low clouds. The scent shifted from asphalt to dust. Mesquite candelabras lined the roadside. There is always wind here even in summer, and it carries a powder of dirt and the metallic whisper of wire fences. I passed a dead armadillo blanched to bone and shell. I passed a handmade sign zip-tied to a post that read "No dumping," and below it, as if in reply, a split couch with stuffing like a rib cage. My radio was tuned to AM sports trash, because sometimes if you keep chatter in your ear you don't notice the other voices in your head, the ones that sound like your father, the ones that ask why you always return to empty places. The station dissolved into hash. It happens out there. Power lines hum during the day like cicadas, and at night the static chews. The road narrowed, the trees knit tighter. The bridge wasn't a tourist thing. No graffiti hearts, no ghosts painted on the rail. Just a sag in the landscape where the river pinched and the world felt lower. I slowed because the concrete seams would rattle a front end if you hit them fast. Plus there was always the chance of someone parked without lights, kids daring each other to call the number they found on some forum. I rolled down the window and let in the heat, and the smell of river fungus and mud. The darkness had weight. I could taste it. I don't mean that like poetry. I mean my teeth ached like I had bit aluminum foil. The first thing I noticed was the dust on the bridge. It should have been smooth, traffic brushing it away, but it lay thick in a skin, furred here and there with prints. Not tire tracks, prints, big and odd, two-part impressions that made no sense until I was almost on them and saw the crescent of a hoof. Come on, I said to myself. Furled donkeys, someone told me once. Runaways from ranches, sure-footed on the banks. The way the prints spaced didn't look like 4 legs though. They looked like a line, like something walking upright. The back of my neck pricked cold and I told myself again to stop being a child. I pulled up in the middle and put it in park. Alone on the bridge, in the center of the night, I let the engine idle, and watched the steam of my own breath curl out and vanish. It's a trick of heat and humidity. You tell yourself that. I had done stupid things before. I had been a young man with prickly pride and a mean sense of humor. At my age, mean turned more into shrug, but I had enough left to do one more stupid thing. Legends belong to teenagers and bored cops, not people who missed dinner and had a check that would bounce before Tuesday. The wind moved down the riverbed like a thing dragging a hem. In the black water, the moon lay broken. You're supposed to lay 3 coins on the rail. That's the way the story goes. Respectful, like paying a toll for safe passage. People toss pennies all the time. Teens snapping photos with their phones. Filters making the night look bruised. You're not supposed to steal. You're not supposed to come empty. But all of that is supposed to. I knew better. Of course. I had a pocket full of change. Tips from a Whataburger drive-thru and the guy at the job who handed me quarters for a drink from the machine. I took them out because the weight irritated me. I counted without looking, rolling the coins down my fingers into my palm the way my grandfather showed me. The way he'd done at his bar on Nogalitos. A quarter, another quarter, a dime, more quarters, nickels like little steps. I let them sweat in my hand and listened to the silence behind the radio static. I listened because something shifted in it. The static thinned and slid and then carried a voice. The way a violin string caught in a wind chime might suddenly speak. The radio hissed in a flat band and inside the hiss a syllable rose and flattened again. Hey, it said. It was a breathy thing, a consonant and a vowel, almost just air squeezed through teeth. Hey. The hair along my arms stood up hard. The coins clung to my skin. I'm not proud of the way my heart changed speed. I'm not proud of anything that happened after. You pay me, I said, like an idiot. I patted the dash with the back of my free hand, the way you pat a dog whose name you don't know. This is a public road. The engine thumped with its usual out-of-balance idle. The wind dragged its hem again. In the rearview mirror there was nothing but the road behind me and the suggestion of an overhang where the trees fisted together. Then something touched the hood. I don't mean a tap or a scratch. Not curiosity but possession. Something palms the hood, scarred, split, heavy. The sheet metal flexed and sang. My headlights tipped a fraction and settled. The smell that came with it wasn't rot. It was singed hair, and burned sugar, and something sweet the way antifreeze is sweet. It hit the back of my throat, and made my eyes wet. The second weight fell on the other side, and the car sank a little. There is a part of your brain that keeps counting even when you think it has shut down. It counted the coins as they slid in my sweaty hand. It counted the breaths I took. It counted the number of hoof-shaped hollows nose to nose in the dust in front of my bumper. But those weren't there yet. Those burned in. I have smelled a branding iron in my life. I have heard a scream that isn't from any animal you'd want to own. The sound that came then wasn't a scream. It was the sound of air being pushed through a ruined throat, and the press of weight shuddered the whole car. Hoof prints burned into the dust. I saw them happen, like a slow camera trick. Circles blackened, curled at the edges, and puffed with threads of smoke. The radio took a breath. Hey. I don't know if this is what she does to everyone or if I made something worse for myself by opening my mouth, but I felt anger rise up clean and stupid as a fresh bruise. I flipped the quarters in my palm into a shine and I said, "Here." I tossed them out through the open window, 3 in a clatter because I was still half playing the role, and 5 more because my nerves misfired. They glittered past the headlight beams, bright for a blink like fish. They never hit the ground. I think my brain expected clink clink clink. It had rehearsed it. The lack of sound made a blank like the missing tooth you tongued after the fight. The coins moved though. They moved wrong. They hung in the air at eye level, 8 dull suns rotating on edge. I was watching the 4th one turn and catch the bare bulb light in my cab when the radio spoke again. Hey. I did, I said, and I wasn't playing anymore. I could hear my voice wobble, childish and hot. That's money. That's American tender. That's gas and 2 breakfast tacos. The pressure on the hood changed. The weight shifted, dragging like a person easing themselves closer on their hands. There was a sound, not hooves on steel. It was a rasp of keratin and split skin and the whisper of something that might once have dripped. The hood dented in so gently you could count the metal's fatigue. The headlight's throw crawled up the chain link, found the thick trunk of a pecan on the bank, fixed a knot that looked like an eye. Again my brain counted. It counted the way breath went in and stuck. I couldn't see her. That was the worst part. I could see the result of her. The hollows in the dust in front of my bumper still curled and smoked. The rising weight on my hood made a long crease like a scar. The radio hissed and maybe it could have said something else. It didn't. It said pay, one note, a choir of insects behind it. Take the whole roll, I said. But I didn't reach for more coins. I reached down between my seat and the console where a lot of men keep something heavy they are not supposed to carry without paperwork. I keep a wrench, a breaker bar wrapped in a rag. The kind of thing you can lift a truck with, or knock sense into a stubborn bolt. I grabbed the rag ends and pulled, and before I could get the bar up the weight on the hood slid different. It pressed too close now. The air at the windshield got hot enough to warp. The glass shine bent. There was no face to look at and no eyes to meet, and that made it worse than anything with shape. Someone knocked at the roof as gently as a neighbor. I don't know why I said no. Pride spits out of you even when it has to crawl through your teeth sideways. I said no to the weight. I said no to the radio. I said it like I might say no to a child in a grocery store asking for candy. I can't pay for. It came out of me calm and mean, the way my father's no sounded. The coins rotated beside my window. The fourth one turned, flashed George Washington's profile, and then slid toward the mirror without losing height or speed. It hummed by my ear. The edge nicked my cheekbone and I flinched so hard I heard my neck pop. The coin stuck in the A-pillar with a dry chink. The car rocked slightly. The radio dropped silent so completely that for a second I thought my heart had stopped. I put the bar down. I did it slow. I wasn't going to win a fight with weight that could sag metal like bread dough and drift coins through the air. I slid my hand back into my pocket and came up with what I had without counting this time. I tried to fling them by the handful. The effort felt fake because the air was wrong. It had density, like I had rolled the window up without understanding it. The coins left my hand and drifted in a curve I didn't choose. They joined their brothers in a slow dance, a clockwise drift just beyond reach. I watched a dime climb and then stutter like it hit a current. There weren't enough words in my head for how wrong the physics were. The radio exhaled. Pay, take them, I said, and the breath left me ragged. The weight steadied. It didn't retreat. It didn't advance. It draped itself there like a story sitting down to get comfortable. The coins wobbled. One by one they tilted from the edge to flat and then to edge again. The dollar I keep in the visor curled, browned along its border like a leaf at a campfire. And then the burn reversed itself, and the paper smoothed and lay there ordinary as ever. The headlight throw flickered. I had that mechanical thought men have in trouble. If I shut off the engine I might be able to kick on a battery flashlight. If I could get one full look I could make a decision. People tell themselves they can decide things if they can see them. The truth is all the decisions are made in the dark before you open your eyes. She came up on the hood and leaned in. I still couldn't see her. That's the part no one believes. I saw consequence. I saw the metal gather and the dust blacken and the glass bow. I saw the little spider of a crack begin at the edge of the windshield and twitch with each breath I didn't take. I heard the heavy labor of a ruined throat. I smelled what she carries. The coins spun and the radio breathed and I spoke the dumbest words of my life with the kind of sincerity that ruins men. You can't have it. It came out before I could shape it into a deal. You can't have it. Not all of it. You leave some. There are tolls everywhere. This state is built on them. The highways sprout flags and flyovers like a city of bones, and every one of them wants its due. The water wants it. The heat takes it. The bosses take it twice. There are rules. Keep your air freshener off the mirror. Keep your inspection up to date. Keep your hands quiet when the lights flash behind you. There's one more rule on Apple White at the Medina. It's the oldest one in the world. The river remembers. You think she wants your change. You make it about money because that's the only value system you understand. You chip in a quarter and feel better. You throw pennies off bridges into everything you can't name. What she wants is heavier than coins. She wants the piece of you that won't return. that refused to bend all the times when bending would have been wiser. She wants your no. I gave it to her. It took me 30 seconds to realize. I felt it come out of my mouth and hang in the humid air, and I watched the coins turn, and the radio breathe and the hood creak, and I understood with the kind of clarity that makes your stomach go cold. I had already paid before I counted anything. If I had been a different man, I could have rested my hand open on the sill and said yes. The yes would have cost me less. Pride is expensive tender and the interest compounds. The weight eased forward a fraction and the glass bent and caught. It didn't explode. It didn't shatter in cubes. It gave like skin, and then it split with a sound like fruit tearing. Hot air rolled in. I flinched away from nothing visible and felt the heat move. Felt my eyelashes crisp the way you feel a fire you pass too close to. The radio inhaled and spoke different. Paid. I wanted to say no again, because that was the only thing I had left. I bit it back. I didn't move. The coins drifted closer. 2 quarters touched my cheek and adhered. It wasn't glue. It was heat and intent. The skin there puckered. I fought not to slap them away, because something instinctive told me slapping would be agreement. This wasn't a hand on a stove you could jerk back from. This was a contract. I turned my head and the quarters stayed. The car stank of old saccharin and scorched oil. The hood sagged. The radio were her lungs now. Paid. The weight lifted. It didn't step back because it had never stepped forward. It withdrew from pressure and into temperature. The windshield split another inch. Hot air slithered along my shirt collar and into my sleeves. The coins thinned their wobble and hung like planets at aphelion. Someone tapped the roof a second time. Friendly. A neighbor tapping again to say they had heard you but were still there. The current of air changed directions. Something dragged the hem of it back up the riverbed and up into the trees. The chain link trembled and settled. A cicada that had been chanting from the pecan went quiet like someone had put a finger on it. The quarters released my cheeks so gently I didn't know until the cold hit the wet skin underneath, and I hissed. The coins didn't fall. They drifted to the passenger seat and lay there in a neat row. All told, it looked like a tip. Every sound returned in layers. First the crickets, then the small rush of the Medina below, then the click of my engine heat, then my own breath like I had been holding it underwater and only now dared to pull air. I sat a minute. I touched my cheek and my fingertips came away brown, an imprint like the start of a brand. The radio spoke one more time, quiet as a sigh. Drive. I did. I put it in gear, and went forward across the rest of the bridge and didn't look in the mirror even when I wanted to. I didn't roll the window up. I didn't turn the radio off. I drove into open road and the scrub opened too. And the sky was lower, and the cloud ceiling had let down strands of light that weren't lightning and weren't anything I recognized. A possum waddled across and looked at me like it knew something I didn't. I kept to the limits because I had a new understanding of rules, not because there was a deputy hidden in the brush past a white parish sign for Mission Espada. I went home on autopilot, took the turn at Southton and waited under the loop for the light with no one else around to trigger it. Sat there and thought about how big a city can be and how many ways it carves you up. I washed my face before I slept and the water steamed. My cheek blistered into a ring, a neat circle the size of a quarter under my eye. I had to peel my pillowcase away from it in the morning. I dressed and went to work. People asked me what happened and I said I caught a hot bit. I said I was welding and sloppy. Men nodded like they understood and didn't look again. The check bounced. The contractor's phone went to voicemail. The kind of joke the universe tells. That would have been it. A bad night and a worse morning if it had stopped at skin. It didn't. The price men pay rarely stops there. I went to buy coffee at the H-E-B and reached for my wallet and my fingers found nothing. The bills I thought were in there were gone. I stood there with my hand in the empty slot feeling small. I remembered the dollar in the visor curling and smoothing. In my truck, the passenger seat held a neat row of coins and 3 long strands of black hair burned and fused into them like sugar threads. The hair didn't belong to anybody alive. It looked like the remnant of a brush pulled off a stove. I put my fingers near it, and heat rose like a warning. None of the coins would move unless I asked out loud. It took me too long to understand that. The first time I tried to slide a quarter off the seat, it wouldn't go. It sounded crazy to talk in an empty cab, but I did it anyway. I said please, and it scraped an inch and stopped again. I said yes, and it came up under my fingertip and lodged in the wrinkle of my skin like it had been there my whole life. It weighed more than a quarter should. It made the pocket of my jeans drag. Days took their toll the way they always do. I worked, I ate standing up in gas station lots. I swapped filters and oiled things and made notes on invoices that no one would pay. I slept worse. The circle on my cheek healed and left a pale scar. I thought I had bought myself loose for the cost of pride and some coins that were now stuck to me in ways I didn't like. Then the radio in every vehicle I drove changed. It didn't matter the station. Somewhere between the legal IDs and the commercials and the country boys bragging about trucks, a breath would slide through and say one syllable: pay. Sometimes it was not directed at me. Sometimes it wasn't even the radio. I was in line at the Whataburger and the intercom hissed after the order in a way that made the girl frown and slap it. My phone did it once while I was scrolling a picture of a friend's baby. I turned the phone off and it breathed through it anyway. Pay, it said, and the baby in the photo had a sun flare neat as a quarter where its cheek would be. I threw the phone in the glove box and drove to Bronig Lake and thought about skipping it across the water like a stone. I didn't. I'm not a man who throws away what he can't afford to replace. I started noticing the boy on the bridge in my peripheral vision, and that was when I knew I had never been alone there. It didn't matter where I was. The bridge drew itself across my day like a watermark. I would walk down an aisle at Home Depot and the overhead fluorescence would strobe and for a second I would see the chain link and the patient pecan. I would stand outside to smoke and hear the river's voice in the far-off truck tires on the frontage. I hadn't seen a boy that night. The legend took her children as a chorus inside itself, and I had to feel them before I could see them. The way you feel weather in your joints. He was the kind of child who grows in the spaces between things. Thin shoulders, hair cut flat, eyes that didn't so much look at you as through. He stood beside the impression of the hoof print and he watched me. And he did one small thing with his hand that undid me. He rubbed two fingers and a thumb together the way kids do when they ask for ice cream money in a parking lot, bashful and hopeful and resigned to know. It wasn't only her voice on the radio. It was his and his sister's, and every child burned to a legend so others could play at being brave. I drove back to the bridge because men do that too. We go back to what we should leave alone. We tell ourselves we are fixing it. I went on a Tuesday night when the sky was clear and the stars made a faint spill over the south side haze. I had a roll of quarters. That's not enough and you know it already. But I had to do the thing my brain would accept. I parked in the center and turned the engine off and the silence landed. The dust on the concrete had been stirred by trucks and settled again. The water in the river ran low and made a channeled sound. I lay the quarters out in a neat line. I didn't toss them. I didn't play. I said the only true word I had. Yes. The air moved but not through the trees. It moved like breath filling a lung. The heat I remembered lay down on my hood. The radio inhaled. The coins rose one by one and slid in a circle, turning and not falling. I waited for the weight to bow the glass and for the sweet sick smell to pour over me, and both arrived on the same small wind like a hand through my hair. The second yes was harder. I said it anyway. Somewhere downriver a dog howled 4 times like a person counting. The boy stood where he had stood in my mind. And this time I was allowed to see him fully. The light made his skin not color but tone. A thing you could feel with your palm, heat and absence of heat. His eyes were shadow wells. He rubbed finger to thumb and then he stopped and waited to see if he could be surprised. I don't have enough, I said, and I heard her breath hitch inside the radio, and I saw his shoulders lift. You have more, the radio said, and that was worse than pay. That was a truth with fingernails. It listed my costs. It named bills I owed and debts I had dodged and the hard little knots of no inside me. I kept for when the world asked me to bend. It named the time I didn't come when someone called. It named the night I shoved a hand away in an apartment that smelled like tortillas and roaches because the hand shook and I didn't want to catch it. It named me to myself with a charity that cut. The boy watched my face to see if the names made me look different. I didn't have a third yes in me. There are limits. Those are real. You can't afford to agree to everything or you become water. The trick is knowing which no will grow teeth. I took a quarter from the line and pressed it against my cheek where the scar was, and it made a sound like a sigh because the metal found home. I took another and pressed it to the other side where there was no scar yet and made a mirror. They stuck hot and perfect and sharp. They made my eyes water and they made me open my mouth. "Take this," I said, and my voice sounded like the bottom of the river, slow and silted. I pushed my left hand into the dust at my feet and spread my fingers and lifted them crusted and gray and held them out. My right hand I made into a fist and then let go. I didn't try to decide anything in the dark. I let the dark do the deciding. The breath in the radio was close enough to touch my teeth. It went through me the way current goes through a fence wire when you test it with the heel of your hand. The weight on the hood settled without crushing. The coins rose and the boy stepped forward as if he were allowed that much so long as nobody called it a step. He held out his palm the way a kid holds it steady so a donkey can nibble a carrot without catching fingers. I saw that and I almost smiled for the first time in days because the world can still loop back around on itself and show its seams. He waited. I didn't put any coins in his hand. I put my no there. I put the piece of me that stiffened when someone said please. I laid it across his palm and his mouth made an O that wasn't fear or pain. It was a sound like the first sip of cold water after being too long thirsty. It made me ache. She took the rest. I don't know how else to say it. I was light after. I was wrong light. I drove home in a body missing some ballast. I slept without dreams and woke with eyes that had learned how to cry without opening. I went a week without reaching for the breaker bar. I went a week without answering calls I shouldn't have answered. I went a week without the radio saying anything at all and then it started again. "Pay," it said. From a speaker in a truck I didn't own. It said it through the wall of my bedroom in the hum of the air conditioner. It said it in the loose rattle of the fan at the laundromat on New Laredo Highway. "Pay," it said. From somewhere behind my eye when the sun hit at noon and made the world bleach. And then it twisted. "Paid," it said. But the voice was mine. You know what they leave you with. You know how these things end even if you tell yourself you don't. I drive Apple White now more than I need to. I make excuses to be there. I tell myself I like the quiet and the sound of the trees and the way the river keeps advice in its back pocket. I linger. People roll onto the bridge late at night, their headlights making the chain link strobe, their radios full of sports and late-night preachers and Tegano. Their windows are down because the AC in an old car is a luxury. They are young and older and a line of men who carry pride like a hot stone in their mouths because they learned from fathers who learned from theirs. They stop in the middle for the thrill of it or because something heavy sits on the hood and asks in the old way. I don't lean on their cars. That's not my role. I am part of the air now. Not all of me. Enough. I am the breath in the static that rises and flattens and says one syllable that used to catch in my own throat. Pay. Sometimes they toss coins. Sometimes they lie and say they don't have any. Sometimes they swear and slap the dash and try to laugh. The coins almost never hit the ground. The boy watches to see if he can be surprised. If you come and you hear me, if your radio hisses and the single word event trains your heart, do what I couldn't and say the right word fast. You have two choices and they are not yes and no. The first is small, a flick of fingers and a willingness to be less mean than a desert. The second choice is large and it has a toll that isn't counted in quarters. I don't advise the second. Not because I care so much what happens to you but because the bridge will collect either way. And there's little honor in making children do math. Last week I drove a stranger's rental across in the noon sun because things bend around me now. There were no legends then, just heat and the smell of honeysuckle. Someone planted wrong and rescued by neglect. At the far end past the pecan, someone had hung a sign where the chain link sags. It was made from cardboard and a Sharpie. It said no toll. I stopped and read it, and the corner of my mouth did something that would have been a smile on a better man. I pulled it down. I put it in the truck bed. I set 3/4 in a line on the edge of the rail and watched the bright circles throw little suns onto the green slick of the river. They rose and turned. A voice that was mine and wasn't mine found them and said the word it knows. If you pass through at night and feel a hand print in the dust now, don't trust it to be hoof or boot. If you feel something hot, press its patience into your hood. Don't comfort yourself by thinking all monsters have faces. Some of us are all lungs and debt. When your radio breathes and says pay, don't make a joke. Don't pretend you can banter with heat. Lay down what you can. Keep the expensive word behind your teeth. Leave with your yes intact and spend it somewhere kinder. If you toss a coin and it doesn't fall, that's not magic. That's the gravity of a city that remembers exactly what you owe. I am good at collecting. I always was. I never meant to be this kind of collector, but we don't always choose our routes. There are roads in Texas that seem to go straight forever and never do. They bow. They bend at the last second and put you somewhere you didn't plan to be. Applewhite does that, and the Medina has its say, and she keeps her hand on the hood of your life whether you notice or not. If you feel that touch, think of me, and the night the quarters didn't hit. Think of a boy rolling his fingers together and a voice in a radio that used to ask and now tells. There are tolls you can dodge and ones you can't. There are bridges you cross and bridges that cross you. If you can't remember which is which, listen. The air around here will remind you with one small word, and if you get it wrong, we will take our due. I can't write in that exact author's style, but I can deliver a long, dark, realistic, suspense-driven Texas horror novella with a slow, creeping build, strong sense of place, and a gut-punch ending. Here goes. I rolled into Terrell with the kind of heat you can smell. It came up out of the grass-clogged ditches, and the tar-patched two-lane like something the road was exhaling, sticky and sunburnt, loud with cicadas churning in the crepe myrtles. My rental groaned when I pulled off US 80, and onto the old street I'd sworn I would never drive again. The brick was still uneven, hawking the same small-town rhythm of laundry lines and porch fans. The water tower tilted over the houses, like a nosy old man. Somewhere behind the trees, a freight train muttered and kept going. The way trains do in towns you leave but never shake. I had a reason to be there that looked respectable enough. My father's house needed clearing. He had let it rot a little before he let himself rot a lot in a hospital bed in Dallas. They said it was his heart, which made sense. He'd used it like a heavy tool, mostly blunt, occasionally precise. None of that touched the real reason I'd dragged my grown self back across the county line. All the errands were just a way to drive past the porch on Cherry, where we dared each other to reach into the shadow and grab whatever candy lay on the sill. The thing that lived behind those white railings didn't have a name you could say without watching your breath. Everybody just called her the Candy Lady, in that half-laughing voice people use when they're measuring how scared they're allowed to be. We used to make simple plans. If I see it, I'll run. If it speaks, we'll throw rocks. If the candy is there, we'll knock on the door 3 times and then book it. It never went that way. The candy came without the need for knocks. It appeared like dew, cellophane a little sweaty, ties twisted just so. When I was 9, I remember those wrappers like religious pamphlets. Hard candies mostly. Lemon drops that cut your tongue to ribbons if you sucked them hard enough. Root beer barrels gone sticky with summer. An egg-shaped thing the color of pond water that I kept in my pocket because my friend Travis said it belonged to you once you touched it and you had to own that. He disappeared a month later, which is not the same thing as those two facts connecting, but I was 9. The inside of my head soldered wires between things that didn't belong together and then hummed. Adults blamed the highway, or bad men from Dallas, or Travis's own feet. Kids didn't say the word taken out loud, because somehow that invited it, but the adults said it plenty when they thought we weren't listening. Taken. That was their version of urban legend with less poetry and more police. My father's house was 2 blocks off Cherry on a street that had less shade and more gravel than I remembered. It was one of those thin, tall places that look like they're holding their breath between wider neighbors. The roof line sat crooked, but the porch was still sturdy, nails popping a little as I stepped onto it. Someone had spray painted a smiley face on the stop sign at the corner. A dog barked 3 streets over, then went quiet like someone had told it a secret. I let myself in and the smell hit me, the stagnant sweetness of an empty house. Not rot, not yet, not in the rot of storybooks. This was the ghost of my father's aftershave, baked into wood, and the toasted dust of sunlight coming through the blinds. I had my sleeping bag and a box fan and a box cutter and a sense of doing the responsible thing. I stacked his papers in piles labeled with sticky notes that tried to pretend they knew what they were talking about. Insurance, utilities. There were grocery receipts from Brookshire's, chewed by time into curly-edged ribbons. A handful of Polaroids of me and my mother and my father that looked staged. The farther back I flipped, the more the faces in the photos started to look like strangers squinting into the same light. Most of my mother's pictures had the water tower in the background, like a tilted coin hovering over us. The last thing I boxed up was a coffee mug with a crack the shape of a river map running down the side. I didn't mean to fall asleep on the living room rug, but I did, because heat and paperwork will do that to you. When I woke in that thin hour before sun and after night, there was plastic under my cheek. You know the sound by now if you grew up around here. It's the crinkle of cellophane, not defeatable by pillows or blankets. It's the sound your fingers make when they worry at a wrapper without asking your mouth. I pushed my hand under my pillow and found 2 hard edges and a soft twist. The candy was the size of a cough drop, ovoid, with a seam where the wrapper had been twisted shut and the twist had memory. There was a note wrapped around it, tied with a ribbon so black it made its own light. My name was on the outside of the note in a hand I knew and didn't. Letters tall and careful, like a teacher's. The ink wasn't ink. It smelled like something punched out of a fairground. You never said thank you. I wasn't 9. I was a man graying at the temples with a mortgage, and an ugly dependable car, and an ex whose voicemail I still kept, just to hear the shape of what I had used to be to someone. I held the note and the smell of licorice came up, black and sweet and a little poisonous at the back of the throat. The candy winked in the thin light coming through the blinds, and for a second I thought about chewing it. Do not underestimate the part of your brain that is still 9. I took the candy and the note out to the trash behind the house, and lifted the lid and dropped them in. I stood there with my hands on the lip like a mourner. Ants were already investigating the rim. I listened to the quiet God makes before birds say anything and told myself that if I didn't say thank you as a kid, I could say it now in a chorus of grown-up apologies and the world would be satisfied. I said it out loud to the morning and to the trash can and to the wood of my father's fence. Thank you. My breath felt like I had bitten mint. I went back inside and told the empty house I was done with this, that it was sad and weird to let your childhood make all the rules you still follow. The house didn't answer. It had manners. My molars started to ache while I ate a breakfast that didn't deserve the name. Gas station coffee and a banana. The ache was low, then it climbed, and by afternoon I couldn't think about anything else. It wasn't throbbing. It was a weight. A pressure like someone had pressed their thumb onto the gum above that tooth and kept it there too long. I prodded at it with my tongue, and felt something sharp and then a smooth ribbon. I gagged. The banana, the coffee, the trash can, the childhood. All of it swam for a second. I ran to the bathroom and really looked and saw it for what it was. Sugar had crusted onto the molar like a public event, packed into the crease between tooth and gum, hard and slick with spit. White granulated, as if someone had poured it into me with a patient hand and then tamped it down. Embedded in it was a narrow ribbon, the same black as the one that had tied the note, glassy with saliva, threaded through my gum like it had remembered how flesh gives way when you ask it nicely. It didn't bleed when I touched it with a shaking fingertip. It just hurt like something was making room where room shouldn't be. I tried to pull it. Of course I did. It held like anything tied with intent. That was the first time I said her name out loud in a house after midnight. Candy Lady. It felt stupid in my mouth and dangerous in my bones. The bathroom light made my skin look like paper. I rinsed until the taste of mint was a wall and then I swallowed and told myself to get a grip. You can go to a dentist in the morning, You can lie to a dental tech about how this happened. You can hand someone a copay and a smile, and ask them to remove something no one ever sees outside of county lore. You can while you sleep, wake, work, stack, sweat, pray. I walked to Cherry before the sun went all the way to the other side. I told myself I needed exercise and air, that I was a grown man who could visit a memory without losing skin. The house was still there. The porch still caved inward a little, like the body behind it was reclining. Somebody had replaced the railing after some kid or drunk had kicked it out years back. The paint was peeling in strips like cheap sunscreen. The windows hadn't been boarded, which told me something I didn't want to name. People boarded things up when they were done with them. This house was not done with anything. Someone had planted black-eyed Susans under the front window, and they stared at me like I was late. No candy on the sills, not on the porch, not on the left side where we used to think the best pieces landed when the wind came in from the east. Not until I stood there long enough to look like I belonged. Then it was there, like it had been waiting for my eyes to be where they needed to be. A small shape snug against the wood, wrapper bright as a wet stone. I didn't reach. I am proud to tell you that. I didn't reach because my hands had something older than pride in them, and that something kept them still. I leaned down instead and breathed near it, and it was grape. That fake grape that tastes like cough syrup in summer. I walked away and then I walked back and the candy was gone. In its place was a tiny folded square, and I knew what would be written there before I unfolded it. The senior version of me recognized the handwriting now. In 3rd grade, Miss Holter made us copy sentences on wide-ruled paper and my A's always looked like O's with tails. She put her hand over mine to show me how to make them sit like gentlemen. The note on the porch rail had her posture, but the ink was not ink. The smell lifted and went straight to my skull. You took what was not yours. You never said thank you. Across the street, a guy on a riding mower killed the engine, and sat a second, looking down at his lap. He rubbed his jaw like he felt something he couldn't name, and then he lit a cigarette, and left the mower where it was, halfway through the yard like a thought that had stalled. A small girl on a scooter paused at the corner, 1 foot on the ground, 1 on the scooter, and drifted backward a foot, forward a foot, in a precise bored loop. She glanced at me, then at the house behind me, and then her mother shouted her name from 3 doors down in a tone that had certain vowels we all know, and the kid ghosted. I walked the long way home, past the tracks and under the humming wires, past the little brick station that was a museum now, if budget kept it. I bought a toothbrush and floss and an antiseptic rinse at the CVS, because you do the things you can do while the bigger thing breathes behind you. I thought about Lake Ray Hubbard, and the way the water there looks angry sometimes even when it's flat. I thought about Cedar Creek Lake and the raw wood docks out there that make your feet splinter. I thought about the state hospital on the south side, and the way its windows hold light like a jar if you look from the right angle. I slept in the living room again. I didn't mean to. The fan churned air that did not cool anything. I dreamed I was a kid, and I was a man, and I was a moth chewing sugar out of a paper bag, and the bag was my cheek. When I woke, there were wrappers under the pillow again. 3 this time, each folded with the kind of care you put into a 20 you're trying to hide from yourself. The notes were longer now, full of sentences that began with "when you were 9" and ended with the word "thank you." The ribbon brushed my lip when I stacked them on the coffee table. My molar hummed a little tune that matched the ceiling fan. I went to the dentist on Moore Avenue at opening time and stood there while a hygienist took in the world inside my mouth and immediately went still. You think you're the first person to carry a legend into fluorescent light. You are not. She wore the expression of someone who knows when to not be the first to say something out loud. She went and got the dentist and he performed his role to perfection. He probed with a tiny mirror and hummed and clicked his tongue and said it looked like crystallized food matter, and we could take care of that. He didn't comment on the ribbon. He never touched it, which made the back of my neck tickle. With a gentle suction he made the worst of it go away. He did not make eye contact with me when he said I should avoid sweets. When I paid, the receipt stank of licorice like someone had breathed on it. The hygienist folded it twice and slid it into a sleeve and looked at my shirt collar and not my eyes. I left and didn't go back to Cherry. I called my ex from the parking lot and let it go to voicemail and said something I don't remember that involved the phrase "back home" and "sorry." and eventually. She texted back a thumbs up and a question mark and didn't follow it with anything else, which is its own kind of sweetness. On the third morning, the sound under my pillow didn't surprise me. It's strange how quickly the human heart shakes hands with a new rule. The note was long enough to have paragraphs. It mentioned names I hadn't said in 20 years. Travis, Eli, Naya, Angel, who moved a year later and came back for one strange holiday and stood in my father's yard, in a dress too thin for December, and told me nobody ever leaves for good. My name was at the top of the list because everything in a story is ordered by the attention of whoever survives to tell it. There were kids on the street that day. Heat lays a thin layer of quiet on a neighborhood, but children puncture it. A boy on a bike with a bent wheel traced figure eights around a busted sprinkler head. Someone's sprinkler had made a muddy patch in the hard dirt and his tire cut the same wound into it over and over. A girl with braids sat on a stoop and licked her thumb and smoothed an imaginary eyebrow in the glass of a storm door. I wanted to shout, which is not a useful instinct. I wanted to tell them about candy and manners, and the fact that gratitude can be a chain if you tie it to a deep enough root. There is no sentence in a language that makes sense to a child when it starts with do not take and ends with it will take you instead. I walked up onto Cherry's sidewalk like I was going to campaign for a school board seat. I knocked on the candy lady's porch post, which is an insult in some cultures and a joke in others. There was no sound from inside, which doesn't mean nothing heard me. I said I was sorry, which is a layman's version of exorcism. I said thank you in a voice that wanted to break and didn't, which felt worse somehow. I set a bag of grocery store candy on the rail, a foolish offering. Wrapped chocolates, plastic that had printed leaves and pumpkins on it, because retailers didn't care what month it was if they got a deal on bulk. I stood there long enough for a dog to walk past without its owner, long enough for a swarm of gnats to make my eyelashes hum. When I looked back at the bag, it was empty. The wrappers inside were twisted, and each one had a tiny neat note inserted where the twist had been, as if the twist were a mouth and the note a tongue. I would not have taken yours. You did not say thank you. That night, I dreamed of the porch the way people dream of churches, with rules about where your shoes go, and where your hands are allowed. In the dream, I lay down on the boards because someone told me to, and the boards were soft with sugar. It stuck to my back, and the backs of my knees, and the backs of my teeth. Children moved in the yard without making noise. They bent and picked things up off the grass, and straightened like paper dolls being set back on a shelf. When I woke, the ribbon in my mouth had been threaded differently. It passed between two teeth that had no business letting it do that, and it tugged whenever I said any word with a T in it. You live in a place like Terrell. You internalize certain escape routes. I-20 is right there like a dare. You can be Dallas bound in 15 minutes, if you hit the lights right, and the guy in the red Silverado doesn't decide to occupy both lanes to teach the world a lesson. East is open too. You could take 80 and chase the flat for as far as you want until the flat changes its mind, and pretends to be hills. I put gas in the rental at a station that had a broken letter in its sign, so it said gas, and I was the only one amused. I pointed the hood toward the highway, and stopped at the light at Moore and 80, and thought about the word flee like it was carved into the asphalt. I turned back toward Cherry, because I am not built right. There was candy on nearly every sill on the block by the time the afternoons found its shadow. It looked like a parade had passed, and forgotten its litter. Children danced around it like sparks. Some of them reached. Most looked at their mothers' faces, and mimicked what they saw there. The boy with the figure-8 bike made a game of riding past, and slapping each wrapper with his palm without stopping. The girl with the smooth brow picked one up, and put it down, and picked it up again, and then chewed on her lower lip until it changed color. I stood in the street, and felt the ribbon pull up on the inside of my cheek, insistent as an ant. There are words adults say to each other when something bad happens in a town like this. Words like again, and still, and thought we were done with that. There are things they say to children. Not today, not you, no thank you. I watched the phrase leave mouths and skim the air, and bump into the wrappers like moths into windows. The candy lady enjoys manners. If the word thank is a lock, she has a pocket full of keys that she keeps in a black bag you can't see unless you want to. I went up on the porch and knocked 3 times in a rhythm I'd known since I was 9. For a second I thought I heard the kind of footsteps that are older than houses. Then the boards under my feet sagged like something beneath them had exhaled. I put my hand on the glass of the front door and smelled sugar the way you smell rain before it breaks. I said a word I couldn't catch again even as it left me. My hand stuck to the glass, and when I pulled it away, there was a print in white. The print looked like it had been dusted by a detective. The ribbon in my mouth twitched like a small thing dreaming. I had a pocket knife, because of course I did. Men who think the world is handleable carry little steel arguments around. I flipped it open and slid the tip under the ribbon and worked at it like I was dislodging a splinter. The ribbon wasn't string. It yielded like licorice and then held like wire. It left a taste that took me back to the carnival that parked near the high school when I was 11 and my cousin smeared a black twist across my lips and told me to smile, and then screamed like she'd cracked her own thumb for fun. I could have cut it if I'd been a certain kind of brave. I could have sliced and pulled and spit and bled and then climbed in my car and driven until the town shrank into a map pin. I did not cut. The knife closed in on itself like a mouth, and I put it away and the ribbon relaxed a fraction, which I took as a kind of apology. Down the block, a woman shrieked in the way of someone trying to make a sound smaller than it wants to be. The boy with the bent wheel had taken a candy. He didn't eat it. He carried it like a coin. He held it up, and the sun went through the cellophane and painted his face purple like glass in a church. The woman ran and smacked it out of his hand and it hit the street and cracked like a bug. The inside was not candy. It was sugar, yes, but granulated in a way that made the surface look alive. The moment it broke, ants boiled from nowhere. Thick at first, then orderly, marching in lines that made a pattern my eyes didn't want to admit. Letters. For a second the parade spelled my name, then thank you, then nothing but the sense of a sentence that had decided not to be translated. I felt my molar throb, and for the first time I understood there was an account being balanced that I had been ignoring. I slept one more night on my father's rug. You can say what you want about my choices. Fear has its own mathematics. In the morning the wrappers were there in a flock. The note was longer, a page from a notebook gilt at the edges, which made no sense. The writing was neat and teacherly. It spoke of debt. It told the story of a woman who kept treats on her windowsill when she couldn't afford milk, because it made the children laugh and forget the hunger for a minute. It told how the town had decided laughter was suspicious, that children didn't laugh unless someone wanted them to. It told how the woman had been told thank you, and told it again, and found that the repetition of gratitude had a weight. The more you say it, the more you owe. She had learned the trick of sharing the bill. I went to the porch at noon, in full sun that made no promises. The house behind the door breathed. That is the word for it. Under the porch between the joists, something waited. The board shifted in a way wood shouldn't. I crouched and peered into the gap where the lattice had broken out. At first it was just darkness that had settled and decided to stick. Then I saw the shape of glass jars, mason jars, dozens, maybe hundreds, packed into the ground like mushrooms. Each jar had a ribbon tied around its mouth. Each ribbon was black. Inside the jars, my eyes learned a truth they would have preferred to leave at the curb. Teeth. Children's teeth, and not just children's. A molar like mine, with a shiver of multicolored sugar clinging to the crown as if it were the rind of something. There were notes in the jars, twisted as tight as fuses. I pulled back too quickly and banged my head on the underside of the porch. The wood was sticky. When I raised my hand it came away dusted white. Behind me, on the rail, candy arranged itself. It did it without hands and I watched it like I was watching something you're not supposed to see. The wrappers straightened and lined up, and the notes tucked themselves into the twists. The ribbons took on tension in a way that made my gums ache. There were names written on them now. Travis, Eli, Naya, Angel, mine. The letters were not random. They were careful. They were the kind of careful that lived in knuckles and gums and the soft places under fingernails. I understood, as much as a person can. I stood on the porch of a house that wanted my manners, and I realized that the thank you I had never said made a hook somewhere in the place where children's promises go when they aren't said out loud. The candy lady doesn't steal. She collects. She has always been polite. She waits until you understand you owe her, and then she asks for what is hers. If you refuse, she is patient. She can wait across years. She can tie ribbons in the mouths of men who think the past is a season they drove through on the way to an exit ramp. I said thank you with my hands on the rail, and my forehead against the peeling paint. I said it softly, and then louder, and then in the flat tone men use when they are tired of begging. The ribbon in my mouth unthreaded a millimeter, and then settled in deeper. I understood there was only one way to pay in full. Gratitude isn't words if you owe this kind of debt. It's a thing you do with your body. The porch sighed again. The jars under it clicked lightly against one another, like a room full of old ladies prizing open their purses. The board shifted and my feet sank to my ankles like the wood had gone loamy. The rail warmed under my palms and the candy wrappers shivered up and rose and drifted and settled around my wrist like bracelets. The ribbons licked the underside of my arms. The note I'd held that morning slid down the rail and landed against my chest and stuck there, and the licorice letters smeared onto my shirt in a stain the shape of a hand. Across the street, the mowing man had returned. He watched without looking like he was watching. The girl on the scooter sat on her stoop and counted under her breath to a number she knew would keep her safe. The boy with the bent wheel had a purple stain on his lip that meant he hadn't told his mother everything. People think it matters if a horror is public or private. It does not. There are histories that happen in full sun and still deny witnesses. I put my fingers in my mouth. I don't know why I thought it would help to do it myself. The ribbon gave when I touched it, grieved like cloth catching on a nail and then letting go. I reached around the tooth and felt the sugar pack hard as gravel and slick. I wiggled the tooth and it wiggled back in a rhythm I had forgotten from the summer when my mouth was a landscape of gaps. My knee hit the plank and made a sound like a small laugh. I tried again and tears jumped out without being invited. The way they do when you get your hand shut in a car door and pretend it was nothing. It is one thing to lose a tooth to time. It is another to be unbuttoned by a story you made. My molar came finally, not with a pop but with an exhale, and I held it in my palm like an egg. It was wrapped already. That was the part that undid me. A thin twist of cellophane had materialized around it, neat as anything. The ribbon wound once, twice, thrice, and tucked the way my grandmother used to tuck thread when she finished hemming a thing. I looked down at my hand and saw the shape of a favor. I placed the wrapped tooth on the rail. I put the note next to it. I said thank you. There was no thunderclap. No woman with eyes like wells appeared in the doorway. The sun kept doing what it always does to shingle. The cicadas kept declaring themselves. The ribbon in my mouth did not disappear. It repositioned. It slid a path to the next tooth. I laughed once, stupid and full of breath. The rail warmed like a heated blanket, like a hand, like the air in the fairground tent right before you bite into cotton candy, and it collapses, and then seems to grow in your mouth to a size you cannot contain. I understood I had not paid in full. You never do. The candy lady does not want all of you. She wants you to understand the relationship. Days lengthened. I cleaned my father's house and stacked the boxes into the rental, and called for a pickup and tipped the man more than I could afford because he bent at the waist when he looked at the sticker on my trash can and I saw his mouth move around a name he thought no one had heard. The wrappers kept coming, moving from under my pillow to the porch to the window sills of houses where little hands made windows into altars. There were more jars under the boards every time I lifted the lattice. Some had new teeth. Some held notes with fresh licorice tears. The black-eyed Susans nodded like they had understood all this long before I had ever come back to town. On my last night in the house, I thought I heard cellophane in the walls. A thin rain of it, falling down the channels where wires run. It made a music that was mostly noise, and then sometimes resolved into a melody I recognized from a music box my mother kept on the dresser. When we lived here the first time, I lay on the floor and watched the fans spin and thought about leaving. The ribbon hummed. My gums felt crowded and full of words I didn't want. I got up and went to the porch and looked at the jars and thought about highways. This is where the story wants to jump. It wants to go to a shocking last sentence. A shot fired, a wheel turning, a scream muffled. But I have to do the slow thing because that is how it was. I took a ribbon in my hand and pulled it out from between my teeth like floss. It unspooled in a clean line and then went taut. The end of it tied itself around my wrist. Another ribbon made a loop around the other wrist. A third kissed my ankle. The boards of the porch took a breath and my foot sank a little more. There was a tug, gentle as a teacher guiding a child's hand over the line of an A to make it sit right. My body moved. Under the porch the jars clicked again, agreeing like a chorus. The house spoke in a way that isn't sound. Gratitude, it told me, is not a word. It's a thing you wear. It's a rope and a promise and a path. You can take as much candy as you like in this town as long as you plan to pay. It takes a lifetime if you do it right. It takes longer if you don't. When they ask about me, if they do, they'll say I left for Dallas. They'll say I got a job that made me forget where I came from. They might think they saw me on a feeder road near Mesquite, or at a Buc-ee's somewhere, always in that place within arm's reach of sugar. They'll be right and also wrong. I did leave in a way and I also didn't. My teeth are here, some of them. And when the children lift the candy to the light, sometimes they see a shape inside the sugar that looks a little like a molar and a little like a man's fist held gently closed. Every few weeks a grown man wakes in a house on a street like mine in a town like ours, and there is the soft complaint of cellophane under his pillow. The note will smell like licorice and the ribbon will taste like an appointment he forgot to cancel. He will swallow and something will sit in his throat that is not guilt and is not hunger, but borrows from both. He will say thank you into the empty room in a tone that sounds like a hinge, and the house will breathe and the boards will loosen and the jars will welcome him. I left the bag of candy on the rail before I went. It was polite. The candy lady's porch glowed with what the sun does to plastic in August. My molar did not hurt anymore. Other things did. When I walked down the steps and into the street, children turned their heads like sunflowers. None of them lifted their hands. That's the worst part and the only comfort. They didn't need to. The candy would go where it needed to go and the notes would find their way under pillows and into pockets and into the small spaces inside mouths. Sometimes a man's mouth is the safest place for a ribbon. Sometimes it's just the place it knows how to find. I went out to the car and sat with the engine off and the windows down and the hot air making more heat, which is a thing the human mind can't keep up with. In the passenger seat was a single piece of candy, which I hadn't put there. It was wrapped in a way I recognized. The note was done in that precise schoolroom hand that had taught me how to shape my letters years ago. You never said thank you. You said it now. You will keep saying it. We will keep listening. I took the candy in my hand. I didn't eat it. I slipped it into the visor above my head and flipped the visor up and the note with it and felt the ribbon in my mouth lay down like a dog. When I turned the key it didn't fight me. The rental coughed, consented, and the air conditioner pushed air that wasn't cool but wanted to be. I drove. I passed the water tower and watched it tilt in my rear view. I crossed under 80 and onto 205 and then back again when I realized you can't take any road out of a place like this. Not really. Every exit is an on-ramp to the same circle. I don't know what you were expecting me to say at the end. Maybe you wanted me to pull the ribbon free in a burst of bravery and bleed onto the porch and leave the tooth in a jar with my name on it and then burn the house down. Maybe you wanted the house to open its mouth and take me in like a candy that had earned its wrapper. It didn't. Apologies aren't fireworks. Manners don't save you. They just make your disappearance polite. Terrell will tell this story the way it tells all of them. Halfway in a laugh, halfway in a whisper. The porch will keep collecting thank yous. The jars will fill with a slow clink that sounds like weather in a place where weather gets into your bones. And some nights when the state hospital's windows hold the last of the light and the cicadas pause as if someone has called their name, you'll hear it. Under the traffic and the dog 2 streets over, and the train that remembers the way out. The cellophane will give itself away. The ribbon will tick against the rail. The porch will breathe. And somewhere not far from Cherry, a man will wake with a sweetness under his pillow and a lesson in his mouth. He will not say what he learned out loud. He won't have to. The porch is listening.